Margaret Carter had promised herself she would not cry. Not on this platform, not in this heat, not in front of these people who had already decided she was not worth the trouble. She stood with her spine straight and her carpetbag in her hand, the letter from Thomas Reed crumpled at the edges from 12 days of folding and unfolding, reading and rereading, believing and doubting and believing again. The July sun pressed down on the train platform at Clover Falls like a hand that would not lift. The dust rose in small clouds around her boots as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, watching the crowd thin as one by one the other women who had stepped off that same train were claimed. There had been 7 of them, 7 mail-order brides, each with a letter, each with a hope. She had watched them go, one after another, greeted by men who stepped forward with hats in hand and nervous smiles, leading them away into the afternoon. Now she was the only one left. The platform was nearly empty. The station master had gone back inside. A few townspeople lingered at the edge of the street, not even pretending to be doing anything else. They were watching her. She could feel their eyes, the way she could feel the heat, the way she could feel the paper of the letter going soft and damp in her grip. She did not cry. She had made that promise to herself, and she would keep it. Margaret Carter was 33 years old. She had buried her mother at 22. She had worked in a boarding house in Missouri for the better part of a decade, scrubbing other people's laundry and mending other people's clothes and watching other people's children grow up. She had saved every penny and told herself that one day she would have something of her own. That day had come in the form of a letter from a man she had never met, offering a life in Texas. And now that man had not shown up, and she was standing alone in the middle of a town that had already decided she was not worth claiming. Before we go any further into Maggie's story, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. If you believe a child should never be thrown away, hit that subscribe button right now. Tell me what city you're watching from today. This is a story about finding a home where you least expect it, and I'm honored you're here to hear it. Now, let's get back to that platform. The laughter came from somewhere behind her. She did not turn around. She knew that sound, the casual cruelty of people who have nothing better to do than watch someone else's failure. It was not directed at her, not exactly, but it was about her. She could feel it in the way the voices dropped slightly, in the way the air shifted. She looked down at the letter in her hand. Thomas Reed. She had written to him with hope, with the careful optimism of a woman who had learned not to expect too much, but had allowed herself to expect just a little. She had packed her mother's thimble and 2 photographs, and the good dress that had been her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit. She had come 11 days on a train, and now she was standing on a platform, and he was not here. She thought about crying. She thought about it very seriously, standing there in the sun, with the dust settling on her boots and the laughter still hanging in the air. She thought about how good it would feel to let go, to let the tears come, to let them see that she was hurt, that she was human, that she was not the stone woman they thought she was, but she did not. Because she had learned a long time ago that crying in front of people who already thought little of you only gave them more to talk about. So she stood straight. She lifted her bag. She was about to turn and ask the station master where she might find a boarding house when she heard the sound of running footsteps. Small, quick, light on the wooden boards of the platform. The footsteps of a child who has not yet learned to walk slowly toward anything. That's her. A child's voice, fierce and absolutely certain. That's my mama. I see her. Maggie turned. The little girl was running toward her across the platform, barefoot, her dress mended in so many places the patches had patches of their own. Her hair was a wild tangle of dark curls, escaping from a braid that had long since given up. She had wide, dark eyes, fixed on Maggie with an expression so concentrated it was almost frightening. She reached Maggie and grabbed her hand with both of hers, holding on like she had been waiting for this moment her whole life. "I dreamed about you," the child said, her voice calm and steady, stating a fact that she had known for a long time. "You came on the train." "I told Papa you were coming." Maggie looked down at the small hands wrapped around hers. She did not pull away. She could not. Something in the child's grip, in the certainty of her voice, had taken the air out of Maggie's lungs. "Ellie?" A man's voice came from behind the girl, low and tired, carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who has been saying this name a lot and getting nowhere. "Come away from the woman. You don't know her." The child did not look up. "I know her, Papa. She's the one I dreamed." The man stepped forward onto the platform. He was lean, the kind of lean that comes from hard work, not from want. His boots were dusty, his hat pushed back on his head like he had forgotten it was there. He was somewhere in his early 30s, with dark, watchful eyes and a face that had not smiled easily in a while. He looked at Maggie with the careful, guarded expression of a man who had learned not to trust first impressions. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. "She gets ideas sometimes. She doesn't mean any harm." "I know what I dreamed," Ellie said, still not looking up, her grip on Maggie's hand unyielding. Maggie found her voice. "She isn't bothering me," she said. It came out softer than she intended. The man crouched in front of his daughter, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Ellie, this lady doesn't know us. You can't just grab a stranger's hand." Ellie finally turned her dark eyes to her father. "She's not a stranger," she said. "She's the one I told you about. She looked sad in the dream. She looked like she needed us." Something flickered across the man's face at that. Something quick and raw, there and gone. He stood up and looked at Maggie with a new expression, something between weariness and a question he had not yet formed. "Is someone meeting you?" he asked. Maggie kept her voice even. "There was supposed to be. Thomas Reed. I had a letter." She watched his face. She saw him recognize the name. Something in his jaw tightened. "Reed rode out yesterday," he said, "headed toward San Antonio. I don't think he's coming back." The words landed like stones, one after another. Maggie stood still. The letter in her hand felt foolish, worn, a thing that had been lied to. "Well," she said, her voice just barely steady. "That's good to know. I appreciate you telling me." She shifted her bag. "I'll need a place to stay tonight." "Is there a boarding house?" "Mrs. Halverson takes boarders," he said, "on the north end." He hesitated, glancing down at his daughter, who was still holding Maggie's hand with no intention of releasing it. "But she won't sleep," he said. The words came out plain, honest, without performance. "She hasn't slept a full night in 8 months, not since her mother passed. She wakes up calling for someone we don't know, and the last week she's been saying a woman was coming on the train." Maggie looked at Ellie. Ellie looked back at her with those dark, unafraid eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss," Maggie said quietly. "Both of you." Daniel Brooks nodded once. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said. His voice had gone rougher, the way voices go when a man is saying something that costs him. "I know you don't know us. I know this whole situation isn't, but I've got a daughter who won't let go of your hand, and I don't know what to do about it." "Papa," Ellie said, still looking at Maggie, "she could have supper with us. There's enough. We have the stew from yesterday. There's enough for 3. Silence stretched between the two adults over the child's head. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "It's one meal," he said finally. "You don't have to. But if you have nowhere else to be tonight, there's a spare room. You're welcome to it." Maggie thought about the boarding house. She thought about paying for a room with money she barely had, in a town that had just watched her get left standing alone. She looked down at Ellie's hands wrapped around hers. "All right," she said. "One night." The house was a working house, plain, practical, with no pretense of decoration. A kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a table worn smooth from years of use, 2 bedrooms, and a sitting room with a bookshelf that held exactly 9 books. A rocking chair near the window that had settled into the shape of someone who had sat in it every evening for a long time. Ellie showed her all of it, running from room to room in her bare feet, narrating each space with the confidence of a child who knows her world and is proud of it. "This is the kitchen. Papa burns the biscuits sometimes. Those are my books on the bottom shelf. That one's my favorite. But Papa says I can't read it yet because some of the words are too sad." "Which one?" Maggie asked. Ellie pulled out a slim volume and held it up. Maggie looked at the title, then at the child. "I can read that with you if you'd like. Sometimes the sad words are easier if someone reads them with you." Ellie stared at her for a long moment. Then she put the book back on the shelf and took Maggie's hand again. Daniel made supper. It was yesterday's stew, as promised, and he served it without ceremony. They ate in a quiet that was not uncomfortable. Ellie sat beside Maggie and ate with the fierce determination of a child who does not want to give the adults any reason to cut the evening short. After supper, Ellie asked Maggie to read to her. Daniel started to object. Maggie said, "I don't mind," before he could get the words out, and something in his expression shifted, not quite relief, but close. She read for 40 minutes. Ellie was asleep in 20. Maggie finished the chapter anyway, quietly, in case stopping woke her. When she came back to the kitchen, Daniel was at the table with a cup of coffee, not quite looking at the door, the posture of a man who had been waiting for something and was not sure how to pretend he had not been. "She's asleep," Maggie said. "That hasn't happened before 9 and 8 months. He pushed a second cup across the table without asking. She sat down and wrapped her hands around it. "She told me," he said, before the train came. "She said there was a woman on it and that she was the one. I didn't take it seriously. She says things sometimes. I thought she was just missing her mother." Maggie nodded. Quiet settled between them, the particular quiet of two people who have lived through enough that silence does not frighten them. "What will you do?" he asked. "In the morning?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I have a little money, not much. I thought I was coming here to build something. I'm not sure what I'm building now." "I'm sorry about Reed," he said. "He's not a good man. If I'd known he'd sent for someone, I'd have said something sooner." "You didn't know me?" "No." He looked at her steadily. "I'm starting to." She did not answer that, but she did not look away either. In the morning she made breakfast before he was up. Not to impress anyone, simply because she was awake, and the stove was there, and there were eggs in the basket by the door. When Daniel came into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway, she did not explain herself. She just handed him a plate. He sat down and ate. Ellie came in 20 minutes later, still in her nightgown, and stopped in the same spot. She looked at Maggie, looked at the food on the table, then sat down in her chair with the air of someone for whom this arrangement was entirely unsurprising. "I knew you'd still be here," she said. "Did you?" Maggie said. "I dreamed you made breakfast." Ellie picked up her fork. In the dream it was biscuits, but eggs are fine too. Daniel made a sound that was either a cough or something else entirely. Maggie stayed for breakfast. Then she stayed to help with the dishes because the water was already hot. Then she stayed because Ellie asked if she knew any letters, and she said she knew all of them. And Ellie's eyes went wide like she had announced something miraculous. There was a slate board on the shelf that had not been used in a while. And well, she stayed. Not because anyone asked her to, not officially, not with words that made a promise of it. She stayed because Ellie brought her the slate board and looked at her with those dark, serious eyes and said, "Nobody teaches me things anymore. Papa tries, but he don't know how to sit still." And because Daniel came back inside an hour later, expecting to find her gone, and found her instead sitting at the kitchen table with his daughter bent over a slate, sounding out letters with a concentration so fierce it was almost funny. And the look on his face, unguarded for just one instant, was something she was not going to forget in a hurry. She was not wanted, she knew that. She had not been chosen, she had not been asked to stay, but here, in this plain kitchen with this serious child and this quiet man, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt useful. She felt seen. Not the way a woman wants to be seen when a man rides up to a train platform with a smile and an outstretched hand. Not like that. But seen the way a person is seen when they fill a space that was empty before they got there, and the people in the room settle slightly, without quite knowing they have done it, because something that was missing is missing no longer. By afternoon she had forgotten about the boarding house entirely. The town, however, had not forgotten about her. She found that out when she walked to the general store for Ellie's sake. The child had announced there was no more sugar, and no more sugar meant no biscuits, and no biscuits was apparently not an option. The woman behind the counter, whose name turned out to be Mrs. Pete, looked at her with the particular expression of a woman who has been waiting to have an opinion. "You're the one Reed sent for," Mrs. Pete said. "I am," Maggie said. "Half a pound of sugar, please." "And you're staying at the Brooks place?" "For the time being." Mrs. Pete measured the sugar with slow, deliberate movements. "That's a widower's house," she said, her voice carrying just enough judgment to fill the store without being loud enough to be called rude. "People will talk." Maggie looked at her steadily. "People already are. I heard them yesterday on the platform. 1/2 pound of sugar, Mrs. Pete." The woman blinked, set the sugar on the counter. "I'm just saying it doesn't look right. A woman in a man's house, unmarried." "I'm sleeping in the spare room," Maggie said. "Ellie Brooks asked me to teach her letters. I'm teaching her letters. That's the sum of it." She put her coins on the counter. "Good afternoon." She walked back out into the heat with her back straight and her jaw set, the sugar in her hand. She did not let herself feel the way the whispers followed her out the door, light and persistent as dust. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she would leave soon anyway. A week, maybe 2, long enough to find her footing, find work, find a direction. She was not going to become a burden to a man who had not asked for her and a child who had decided she was sent by dreams. She was not that kind of woman. That was what she told herself. But Ellie was waiting on the porch steps when she got back, knees pulled to her chest, watching the road with the focused patience of a child who has not seriously considered the possibility that the person she is waiting for might not come back. When Maggie came through the gate, the child's whole face broke open into a grin so sudden and so total that Maggie stopped walking for just a second, arrested by it. "I thought you might not come back," Ellie said, not with worry. More like she was reporting a hypothesis that had been disproven. "I said I'd bring the sugar," Maggie said. "Yes." Ellie stood up and took the package from her hands like she was reclaiming something important. "But sometimes people say things, and then they don't do them." She paused, looked up at Maggie with those calm, dark eyes. "You did them." Maggie looked at her for a moment. "I generally do what I say I'll do," she said finally. Ellie considered this, then nodded once with the decisive gravity of a child filing away information for future use. "Good," she said, and went inside to make biscuits. Behind her, from the direction of the barn, Maggie heard the sound of work pausing. She did not turn around. But she was aware, in the way you are aware of a fire even when your back is to it, that Daniel Brooks was standing in the barn door, watching her, and that he had not moved for a while. She went inside. She was not leaving tomorrow. She had not decided to stay, but she was not leaving tomorrow. And that, for right now, in the July heat, in this plain house that smelled like biscuit dough and wood smoke and a child's particular brand of absolute certainty, was enough. The biscuits were good. Ellie made them with the focused intensity she brought to everything, measuring the flour with a seriousness that suggested the fate of the household depended on getting it right. When she slid the pan onto the table and looked at Maggie for a reaction, Maggie took one bite and said, "These are better than mine," and meant it, and watched the child's face do something complicated and radiant all at once. Daniel ate without saying anything, which Maggie was beginning to understand was his version of a compliment. They ate supper like that, the 3 of them at the worn table, Ellie doing most of the talking, narrating a dispute she had had with a boy named Chester at the well that morning, with the moral clarity of someone who has never once doubted which side of an argument she is on. Daniel listened with the patient expression of a man who has heard a great many of these stories and has learned that they require his presence more than his opinion. Maggie listened and asked the right questions. And somewhere between the biscuits and the last of the coffee, the silence between the 3 of them stopped feeling like something that needed to be filled. That was the night Maggie stopped counting how many nights she had been there. She had told herself 1 night, then 3. Then she had stopped saying numbers altogether, because Ellie had started leaving her slate board on the kitchen table each morning like a small act of faith, as if the board being there meant Maggie would be there to use it. And Maggie had not been able to think of a good reason to prove her wrong. 2 weeks passed like that, then 3. She took over the cooking without making an announcement about it, because the cooking needed doing, and she was there, and she was good at it. She mended the curtains in the front room, because the hem had been fraying for what looked like the better part of a year, and a needle and thread cost nothing but time. She taught Ellie letters in the morning, and numbers in the afternoon, and she watched the child absorb everything with a focused, hungry intelligence that made her chest ache. This was a mind that had been waiting for someone to take it seriously, and nobody had thought to. Daniel watched all of it quietly from the edges. He did not ask her to do any of it. He never told her to stop. And he never once said thank you in so many words. But she caught him more than once standing in a doorway where he had no particular reason to be, watching his daughter read aloud from the slate board with her brow furrowed in concentration. And the look on his face in those moments was the most unguarded thing about him. It was Mrs. Halverson who said it first. Maggie was at the water pump behind the house one morning when the older woman appeared at the fence with the specific energy of someone who has been building up to something and has finally decided today is the day. Mrs. Halverson was 60 if she was a day, built square and solid, with a face that had seen too many Texas summers to bother with pretense. "You've been here 3 weeks," she said without preamble. "I have," Maggie said. She kept pumping. "Town's talking." "I imagine it is. They're saying you're living in a widower's house without a ring on your finger and without any intention of getting one." Mrs. Halverson crossed her arms on the fence post. "They're saying it's not decent." Maggie set down the bucket. She looked at the older woman straight on. "What are you saying, Miss Halverson?" The woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said with a frankness that was almost kind, "I'm saying that little girl in there looks at you like you hung the moon. And I'm saying if you're planning to leave, you ought to do it before she gets any more attached than she already is." The words landed harder than Maggie expected. She kept her face still. "I'm aware of the situation." "Are you?" It was not quite a question. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already decided to stay. You just haven't told yourself yet." Maggie did not answer that. She picked up the bucket and went back inside. But she thought about it all day. She thought about it while she made lunch, and while she listened to Ellie read from the slate board, and while she folded the laundry she had taken in from the line. And the thought that kept circling back was not about the town, or the gossip, or the absence of a ring. It was about what Mrs. Halverson had said. "You've already decided. You just haven't told yourself yet." She was still thinking about it that evening when Daniel came in from the far field later than usual, his jaw set, his shoulders carrying the particular tension of a man who has been rehearsing something on the walk home and has not decided yet whether he is going to say it. He sat down, accepted the plate she set in front of him, ate in silence for a few minutes while Ellie told them both in elaborate detail about a mockingbird she had befriended near the fence post. Then Ellie went to wash up, and Daniel put down his fork and said, without looking up from the table, "Mrs. Pete said something to me today." Maggie sat down across from him. "I imagine she did. Harold Pete said it wasn't right. A woman living here. He said people were starting to wonder if there was an arrangement between us." He pressed his mouth together. "That wasn't proper." "And what did you say?" "I said there wasn't one." Silence. That didn't satisfy him. "No," Maggie said, "it wouldn't." He looked up then, and his eyes had that steady, careful quality that meant he was about to say something he had been carrying for a while. "He said, if you were going to stay, I ought to marry you. And if you weren't going to marry me, you ought to go." The kitchen was very quiet. From the other room came the faint sound of Ellie singing something tuneless to herself. "I see," Maggie said. "I'm not telling you what to do," he said. "I don't have the right to tell you what to do." He rubbed the back of his neck. "But Ellie's going to ask me where you are if you go, and I don't have a good answer for her." It was not a proposal. It was not anything close to a proposal. It was a man telling her, in the most inarticulate way possible, that she had become necessary, and he did not know what to do with that. He was putting it on the table between them, waiting to see what she did with it. Maggie looked at her hands. "I'll think about it," she said. She lay awake that night for a long time. Not because she was uncertain. She was surprised to find she was not particularly uncertain, but because she was trying to understand how she had gotten here. 11 days on a train, a platform in the July heat, a man who never came, a child who ran forward with both hands out. She had not planned any of this. She had not chosen it. And yet here she was, lying in a spare room in Daniel Brooks's house, listening to the sound of Ellie breathing in the next room, thinking that leaving would be like pulling something up by the root, damaging not just to her, but to the soil she would leave behind. She made her decision somewhere around 2 in the morning. She made it quietly, without ceremony, the way she made most decisions, by holding both options in her hands until one of them stopped feeling like a real option. She was still working out what to say about it when the trouble arrived the next morning. Thomas Reed came back to Clover Falls. She did not see him come in. She heard about him from Ellie, who had been at the fence when he rode past, and who came inside with wide eyes and the tight-shouldered posture of a child carrying news she knows is bad. "The man from before," Ellie said. "The one who was supposed to meet you. He's at the saloon." Maggie set down the pot she was holding. "Is he?" "He was laughing real loud," Ellie paused. "I don't like the way he laughs." Neither did Maggie, as it turned out. She did not think about it long enough to talk herself out of it. She dried her hands on the dishcloth, put on her good dress, and walked the 6 blocks to the saloon with her back straight, and her heart doing something complicated inside her chest that she categorized as anger, and left at that. She heard him before she saw him. That laugh, big, performative, shaped for an audience. She pushed open the door. There were maybe 8 men inside. Thomas Reed was at the bar, broad-shouldered, red-faced, a glass in his hand. The particular loose-limbed ease of someone who has had several drinks and is enjoying being the most interesting person in the room. He was somewhere in his late 40s, with the kind of looks that might have been good once and had since gotten careless. He saw her. For just a second, something shifted in his face. Then the grin came back, wider than before, playing to the room. "Well," he said, "if it ain't the mail-order bride." He looked her up and down with an air of casual assessment that made her skin go cold. "Thought you'd be on the next train back by now, sweetheart." "I want to know why," she said. Her voice was very steady. She was proud of that. "Why?" "What? Why you sent for me if you never intended to meet me?" He shrugged, easy and unbothered. "Wanted to see what kind of woman answers an ad like that." He took a drink. "No offense, but you're a little long in the tooth for what I had in mind. I figured if you had any sense, you'd turn right around." The men around him were quiet, not uncomfortable, just watching, waiting to see what she would do. Maggie held very still. The anger in her chest had gone white and cold, the way fire sometimes does when it gets hot enough. She was acutely aware that she had 2 choices. She could say something that would give him exactly the scene he was looking for. Or she could say something that cost him more than a scene. She chose the second. "I want you to know," she said quietly enough that the room had to lean in to hear her, "that I am not embarrassed. I came here in good faith. That reflects on me just fine. What you did, leaving a woman on a platform in front of an entire town, that reflects on you." She looked at him steadily. "And Clover Falls is a small town, Mr. Reed. People remember." She turned and walked out before he could answer. She made it half a block before her hands started shaking. She stopped walking, stood in the middle of the road with her arms wrapped around herself and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, breathing deliberately, in and out. The sun was hot on the back of her neck. A wagon passed on her left. She did not move. "Ma'am!" She turned. Daniel was there. She did not know how long he had been there. She had not heard him come up. But he was standing maybe 4 feet away, his hat in his hands, his face carrying an expression she had not seen on him before. It was somewhere between furious and something quieter, something that had been sitting under the fury for a while. "I was coming out of the feed store," he said. "I saw you go in." He paused. "I should have come with you." "I didn't need you to," she said. And then, because she was still shaking slightly, and because she had always found honesty less exhausting than pretense, "But I'm glad you're here now." He looked at her for a moment. Then he put his hat back on and fell into step beside her. They walked back toward his house in silence. And the silence felt like something solid, something she could lean against if she needed to. She did not quite, but she could have. Ellie was on the porch when they got back, her knees drawn up, watching the road. She took in the 2 of them with one measuring look, the way children assess situations with accuracy that bypasses all adult circuitry. And then she said to Maggie, "Did you say what you needed to say?" "I did," Maggie said. Ellie nodded. "Good." She stood up. "I saved you some lunch." That evening, while Ellie was asleep, Daniel sat down across from Maggie at the kitchen table and said, without any of the circling he had done the night before, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honest." "All right," she said. He folded his hands on the table, looked at them. "Do you want to stay? Not, will you marry me? Not, the town says you ought to. Just that. Do you want to stay?" He asked it like the question was actually about her and what she wanted, not about what was convenient or proper or expected. She had thought about this for most of the previous night. She had held the question in her hands from 2 in the morning until the birds started up outside the window. And she had an answer. She had had an answer for hours. But she had not known until this moment, until he asked it that way, that the answer did not cost her anything. "Yes," she said, "I want to stay." He nodded slowly. Something in the set of his shoulders changed, not much, but enough to see. "Then stay," he said. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, without decoration. And somehow that was better than anything more elaborate would have been. She did not think about Thomas Reed again that night. She did not think about the platform or the letter, or the way the town had watched her stand alone in the July sun. She thought about Ellie's slateboard on the table. She thought about the 9 books on the shelf. She thought about the particular way this house felt at night. Not like a borrowed space anymore, but like somewhere she might, given enough time, come to know by heart. She did not know yet what was coming. She did not know about the fever, or the long nights ahead, or the moment when every choice, every day she had stayed, every morning she had gotten up and put the coffee on and decided not to leave, would be tested in a way she could not have imagined. But she knew this. When Ellie woke up the next morning and padded into the kitchen in her nightgown and found Maggie at the stove, the child did not say anything. She just pulled out her chair and sat down and reached for the slate board. And Maggie, without turning around, said, "Good morning." Ellie looked up. Her dark eyes held Maggie's for a long moment. Then she said 2 words quietly, as if she had been waiting for them. "Good morning, Mama." Neither of them acknowledged it. Maggie did not correct her. Daniel came through the door a moment later, stopped, met Maggie's eyes over Ellie's head. He said nothing. The word had been spoken. There was no taking it back. And the truth was, neither of them wanted to. The word settled into the house like it had always lived there, and in that quiet kitchen, with the morning light slanting through the window and the smell of coffee in the air, Maggie felt the last of her old life fall away. And she knew that she had not just stayed, she had come home. The morning after Ellie called her Mama, Maggie woke before dawn to the sound of a rooster and the weight of a decision that had already been made. She lay in the spare room for a long moment, looking at the ceiling, the ring on her finger catching the first gray light through the window. It was not a marriage ring. It was a promise ring, a thing Daniel had made with his own hands, shaped from a piece of metal he had been saving for something else. He had given it to her the night before, after Ellie had gone to sleep, and she had put it on without hesitation. It was not a wedding, but it was a beginning. She sat up, dressed, and moved through the house in the quiet of early morning, putting coffee on the stove, setting the table, listening to the small sounds of the house settling around her. This was her life now. She had chosen it, and for the first time in years, the choosing did not feel like a compromise. Ellie came out of her room with her hair half braided, her nightgown twisted, and her face still soft with sleep. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Maggie with those dark, serious eyes. Then she walked to the table, pulled out her chair, and sat down without a word. She did not say Mama again that morning, but she did not need to. The word hung in the air between them like a thread that had been pulled tight and would not break. Maggie set a plate in front of her, and Ellie picked up her fork and ate with the same fierce concentration she brought to everything. Daniel came in from the barn a few minutes later, washed his hands at the pump, and sat down across from Maggie. He looked at her, looked at the ring on her hand, and said nothing. But there was something in the set of his shoulders that had eased, a tension that had been there since the day they met and had finally, quietly, let go. The weeks that followed had a rhythm that Maggie had never known. Mornings were for chores and lessons. Ellie bent over the slate board with her tongue pressed to her teeth, sounding out words that grew longer and more complicated each day. Afternoons were for the garden, for mending, for the 100 small tasks that kept a household running. Evenings were for supper at the worn table, for the sound of Ellie's voice narrating the day's discoveries, for the quiet presence of Daniel across the room, reading or whittling, or simply sitting with his coffee. And at night, after Ellie was asleep, Maggie and Daniel would sit on the porch or at the kitchen table and talk. Not about anything important, not at first. About the weather, about the cattle, about the price of flour. But gradually, the talk deepened. He told her about his wife, Sarah, who had died of a fever 2 years ago, and about the hollow months that followed, the way he had watched Ellie retreat into herself and had not known how to bring her back. She told him about Missouri, about the boarding house, about the years she had spent being useful to other people and invisible to herself. They did not touch. They did not need to, but when their eyes met across the table, something passed between them that was more than words. The town did not stop talking. Maggie knew that. She saw the way heads turned when she walked down the main street, the way conversations paused and resumed when she passed. But something had shifted. It was small at first, almost invisible. Mrs. Pete, at the general store, did not make a cutting remark when Maggie came in for flour. She simply measured it and took the coins and said, "Good afternoon, Miss Carter." Not warm, but not cold either. A neutrality that was, in its own way, a kind of progress. And then, one afternoon, the Reverend's wife stopped her on the street with a basket of apples and said, "I hear you've been teaching Ellie Brooks to read. That girl has a quick mind. It's good someone's tending to it." The woman looked at Maggie with an expression that was not quite approval, but was no longer suspicion. She handed over the apples and walked away. Maggie stood there holding the basket, feeling something loosen in her chest. It was Mrs. Halverson who brought the news that changed everything. She appeared at the fence one afternoon with the look of a woman carrying information she did not want to deliver. Maggie was hanging laundry, the sheets snapping in the dry wind, and she saw the older woman coming from a long way off. She finished pinning the sheet and turned to face her. "Got a letter from St. Louis," Mrs. Halverson said without greeting. "Came to me because I'm the one who handles the town's mail when the postwriter's late." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her apron pocket and held it out. "It's about Ellie." Maggie took the letter. Her hands were steady, but her heart had begun to beat harder. She unfolded it and read. The handwriting was neat, precise, the hand of someone who had been well schooled. It was from a woman named Esther Winthrop, who identified herself as Sarah Brooks's sister, Ellie's maternal aunt. She wrote that she had learned of her sister's death only recently, through a traveling salesman who had passed through Clover Falls. She expressed grief and concern. And then, she wrote the words that made Maggie's chest go cold. "As the child's closest living blood relative, I intend to claim custody and bring her to St. Louis, where she may be raised in a proper Christian home." Maggie read the letter twice. Then she looked up at Mrs. Halverson. "How did she know to write to you?" "Because I'm the one who wrote back to the inquiries after Sarah died. Daniel didn't want to talk about it, so I handled the correspondence. There were a few letters from Sarah's family back east, but they all dried up after a year. I thought that was the end of it." Mrs. Halverson shook her head. "I didn't think they'd come looking after all this time." "When is she coming?" "She didn't say, but St. Louis is a long way. If she's serious, she'll be on the next train." Maggie folded the letter and put it in her pocket. She thanked Mrs. Halverson and went inside. She stood in the kitchen for a long moment, looking at the slate board on the table, at the half-finished sentence Ellie had written that morning. "The sun is bright today." She had sounded out each letter carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration, and she had looked up at Maggie when she finished with a smile so proud it could have lit the whole room. Maggie had hugged her, and Ellie had let her, leaning into the embrace like it was the most natural thing in the world. She could not lose that. She would not. She told Daniel that evening. He read the letter in silence, his jaw tightening as he reached the end. Then he set it on the table and looked at her with an expression she had not seen before. It was not anger. It was something harder, something colder. It was a man preparing for a fight. "She's not taking Ellie," he said. His voice was flat, final. "I don't care what blood she claims. That child has been through enough. She's not being uprooted and sent to a stranger in street Louis, because some woman who never wrote a single letter in 2 years suddenly decides she has a claim. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to talk to Judge Morrison, first thing in the morning." He rubbed his face. "There has to be a way to stop this. I'm her father. I have rights." "You do," Maggie said, "but she's blood, and the law sometimes favors blood over everything else." He looked at her. "Then we'll find a way to make the law see what's right." The word "we" hung in the air between them. He had said it without thinking, without hesitation. She was included. She was part of this now. She nodded and reached across the table to put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers, and they sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding on. The next morning, Daniel rode into town to see Judge Morrison. Maggie stayed with Ellie, keeping the child occupied with lessons and chores, watching the road with attention she could not hide. Ellie noticed. Children always notice. "You're worried," Ellie said. It was not a question. "A little," Maggie admitted. "Your papa had some business in town. Is it about the letter?" Maggie stopped. She had not told Ellie about the letter. She had said nothing. But Ellie was watching her with those dark, knowing eyes. And Maggie realized that this child, this fierce, perceptive child, had probably known the moment something changed. "What do you know about the letter?" "Mrs. Halverson brought it. I saw her at the fence." Ellie picked up her chalk. She looked serious. Grown-ups only look that serious when something bad is happening. She drew a line on the slate board. "Is someone coming to take me away?" The question was so direct, so calm, that Maggie felt the air leave her lungs. She knelt in front of Ellie and took her hands. "No one is taking you away. Your papa and I are going to make sure of that." Ellie looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Good, because I'm not going." She picked up her chalk and went back to her lesson, as if the matter were settled entirely. Maggie stayed on her knees for another moment, looking at the child who had grabbed her hand on a train platform and refused to let go. She thought about what it meant to be a mother, not by blood, but by choice. She thought about the fight ahead. And she thought about the words she would say to Esther Winthrop, if she ever had the chance. Judge Morrison was a thin man with spectacles, and a face that had been arranged in the same expression of mild disapproval for so long it might have been permanent. He listened to Daniel's account without interruption, his fingers steepled on the desk in front of him. When Daniel finished, he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "Daniel, I'm not going to tell you this is easy. The law is clear on certain matters. A child's closest blood relative has a strong claim, especially if the surviving parent is a widower and there are questions about the child's welfare." "There are no questions about her welfare," Daniel said. His voice was tight. "She's fed, she's clothed, she's learning to read, she's happy. I believe you. But a judge in another jurisdiction might not see it that way, especially if the aunt presents herself as a woman of means and standing." Judge Morrison paused. "Do you know anything about this Esther Winthrop?" "No. I never heard of her until yesterday." "Then we need to find out. I can send a wire to St. Louis, to the authorities there. But it will take time." He looked at Daniel over his spectacles. "In the meantime, I advise you to keep the child close and avoid any appearance of impropriety. The town has been talking about the woman living in your house. That won't help your case. She's not just a woman living in my house. She's going to be my wife." The words came out before Daniel had fully decided to say them. He felt them land in the room, solid and irrevocable. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "It is." "Then you'd best make it official before this aunt arrives. A marriage will strengthen your position. It shows stability, intention." The judge nodded slowly. "I can perform the ceremony myself if you like. No need for a big affair, just the two of you and a witness." Daniel thought about Maggie, about the ring on her hand, about the way she had looked at him when she said she wanted to stay. "I'll ask her," he said, "but I already know her answer." He rode home with the words still ringing in his ears. He had not planned to say it. He had not planned any of this. But as he came over the rise and saw the house below, with smoke rising from the chimney and the laundry snapping on the line, he knew it was the truth. He wanted her to stay. He wanted her to stay forever. Maggie was in the garden when he rode up. She straightened when she saw him, wiping her hands on her apron, reading his face before he could speak. What did the judge say? He dismounted and walked toward her. He said, "We need to find out more about this aunt. He's sending a wire to St. Louis." He stopped in front of her. He also said something else. "What?" Daniel took a breath. "He said if we were married, it would strengthen our position, show that Ellie has a stable home, 2 parents. It would make it harder for the aunt to claim she's not being raised properly." Maggie looked at him. The afternoon sun caught the ring on her hand, and she thought about how she had worn it for weeks without ceremony, without a piece of paper to make it real. She had not needed one, but the law did not see it that way. "Are you asking me?" she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm asking." He paused. "I was going to wait. I was going to do it proper, with a preacher and a dress, and all the things a woman deserves. But I don't think we have time for proper right now." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't need proper. I need you." He let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." He stepped forward and took her hands, and they stood in the garden with the wind blowing and the chickens scratching at the dirt, and it was not a grand moment. It was not a scene from a storybook, but it was real, and that was better. They were married 3 days later in Judge Morrison's chambers, with Mrs. Halverson as the witness, and Ellie standing between them, holding Maggie's hand with a grip that could have bent iron. The judge read the words, and Daniel said his vows in a voice that was rough with feeling, and Maggie said hers in a voice that did not shake. When it was done, Judge Morrison shook Daniel's hand and nodded at Maggie. "You did the right thing," he said, "for that child, for yourselves." They walked out into the afternoon sun, and Ellie looked up at Maggie and said, "Does this mean I can call you Mama forever now?" "Yes," Maggie said. "It does." Ellie smiled. It was not the quick, fierce grin she usually wore. It was a slow, deep smile that spread across her face like dawn breaking. She did not say anything else. She just held Maggie's hand tighter and walked home between the two of them. But the letter from Esther Winthrop had already been sent, and the reply had already been written. The wire came 3 days later, delivered by Mrs. Halverson with a grim face. She handed it to Maggie without a word. The telegram was brief. "Arriving Clover Falls, August 15th. Expect to take custody of Eleanor Brooks. Have retained legal counsel. Esther Winthrop." The date was August 12th. They had 3 days. The telegram sat on the kitchen table like a live thing, like something that might bite if you got too close. Maggie read it 3 times, each time hoping the words would change. They did not. August 15th. 3 days. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket, next to the letter she had carried from Missouri. 2 pieces of paper that had changed her life, one that had brought her here, one that threatened to take everything away. Daniel came in from the barn. He saw her face and stopped. "It came?" She nodded and handed him the telegram. He read it, his jaw tightening, and then set it down on the table with the careful precision of a man controlling his temper by focusing on small things. 3 days, he said, 3 days. He sat down at the table, and she sat across from him. The house was quiet. Ellie was at the fence, talking to the mockingbird she had befriended, her voice carrying through the open window in a stream of cheerful, one-sided conversation. The sound of it made Maggie's chest ache. "We need a plan," she said. "I've been thinking." He rubbed his hands on his thighs. "Judge Morrison said a marriage would help. We did that. But he also said we need to show that Ellie is well cared for, that she's in a stable home with proper schooling. We have that too. It might not be enough. She's hired a lawyer." "I know." He looked at her. "But I'm not giving her up without a fight. I'll sell everything I own before I let that woman take my daughter." Maggie reached across the table and took his hand. "We won't have to sell everything, but we might have to show her something she doesn't expect." "What's that?" "Proof that Ellie is happy. Proof that she's thriving. Not just in a letter from a judge, but in her own words." She paused. "Let me talk to Ellie. Let me explain what's happening. She deserves to know." Daniel's face tightened. "She's 6 years old. She's 6 years old and she's already been through more than most adults. She has a right to understand what's coming." Maggie held his gaze. "And she might surprise you. She's stronger than you think." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, but I want to be there when you tell her." They found Ellie at the fence, the mockingbird perched on the top rail, tilting its head at her as she sang something tuneless. She turned when they approached, and her dark eyes moved from Maggie's face to her father's, reading them both with that unsettling accuracy she had. "You got bad news," she said. It was not a question. "We got news," Maggie said carefully. "We need to talk to you about it, inside." Ellie looked at the bird, then back at them. All right. She followed them into the kitchen without protest and climbed onto her chair, folding her hands on the table in front of her like a small judge awaiting testimony. Maggie sat beside her. Daniel leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, his face carefully blank. "Do you remember the woman who wrote the letter?" Maggie began. "The one from St. Louis? Mrs. Halverson brought it. She's coming to take me away, isn't she?" The words were so direct, so without fear, that Maggie felt her throat close. "She's coming to visit. She wants to meet you. She's your mother's sister." "I know who she is." Ellie's voice was flat. "Papa told me about her. She never wrote, not once, not when Mama was sick, not after she died. And now she wants me? She says she wants to give you a good home." A good home. Ellie looked around the kitchen, at the worn table, at the slate board with her morning lesson still on it, at the window where the afternoon sun came through. "I already have a good home." "Yes, you do," Maggie said, "and we are going to do everything we can to make sure you stay in it. But I need you to understand something. This woman is going to come here, and she's going to try to convince people that you would be better off with her. And we need you to be strong." "I'm strong," Ellie said. "I've been strong since Mama died. I can be strong a little longer." Daniel made a sound, a small, broken thing, and turned to face the window. Maggie reached out and took Ellie's hand. "I know you are. That's why I'm telling you the truth. You deserve to know what's coming." Ellie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Will she take me if I don't want to go?" "We won't let her," Maggie said. "But we can't promise anything. Sometimes the law does things that don't make sense. Sometimes people in power make decisions that hurt the people who don't have power, and that's not fair. But it's real." Ellie nodded slowly. "Then I'll tell her myself. I'll tell her I'm staying." The simplicity of it, the absolute certainty, made Maggie's eyes sting. She blinked hard and squeezed Ellie's hand. "You do that. You tell her exactly that." That night, after Ellie was asleep, Maggie and Daniel sat on the porch in the dark, not speaking, just listening to the crickets and the distant sound of a coyote. The ring on Maggie's hand caught the moonlight, a small, steady gleam. "What if it's not enough?" Daniel said finally. "What if she has some legal claim we can't fight?" "Then we fight anyway. We fight as long as we can, and then we find another way." Maggie looked at him. "I didn't come here to lose everything I found." He turned to her, and in the darkness his face was unreadable, but his voice was rough when he spoke. "I didn't know I was looking for anything until you stepped off that train." They sat in silence, and the night stretched on around them, full of things unsaid and things that did not need to be said. The next morning, Maggie went to see Mrs. Halverson. She found her in the garden behind her house, pulling weeds with the methodical efficiency of a woman who had been doing it for 50 years and had no intention of stopping. 3 days, Mrs. Halverson said without looking up. "You've got a plan? Working on one? Good. Because that woman's been sending letters to everyone in town who matters. She wrote to Judge Morrison, to the Reverend, to Harold Pete. She's laying groundwork." Maggie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What's she saying? That you and Daniel are living in sin, that the child's spiritual welfare is being neglected, that the house is unfit." Mrs. Halverson straightened and wiped her hands on her apron. "She's painting a picture, and it's not a pretty one. None of that is true. I know that. You know that. But she's talking to people who don't know you, who only know what they hear." The older woman looked at Maggie with steady eyes. "You need to get ahead of it. You need to show this town what's real." "How?" Mrs. Halverson considered. "The Reverend's wife is on your side. She told me so herself. And Harold Pete's wife has been singing your praises since you nursed Clara through the fever. You have allies. Use them." Maggie thought about that. She had been so focused on the threat that she had forgotten about the people who had come to her side during the sickness, the mothers whose children she had tended, the families she had helped. She had built something in this town without realizing it, and now she needed to call on it. "I have a favor to ask," Maggie said. "Name it." "I need you to spread the word. Tell everyone who will listen that Ellie is happy, that she's learning, that she's thriving. Tell them that we are married, that we are a family. Tell them the truth." Mrs. Halverson smiled, a thin, sharp thing. "I've been doing that since the day you arrived." but I'll do it louder." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Maggie cleaned the house until it shone, not to impress Esther Winthrop, but because it helped her think. She cooked meals she could freeze, stocked the pantry, made sure Ellie's best dress was clean and pressed. Daniel repaired the fence, checked the water trough, did all the work he could find to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. Ellie, for her part, remained calm. She did her lessons, fed the mockingbird, and asked no questions about the approaching visit. But at night, Maggie heard her talking in her sleep, fragments of sentences that suggested she was not as untroubled as she appeared. "I'm not going," she said once, clear as a bell, and then rolled over and was silent. The morning of August 15th dawned hot and still. Maggie woke early and stood at the kitchen window, watching the road. It was empty. It would be empty for hours yet. The train from St. Louis did not arrive until late afternoon. But she could not stop looking. Daniel came up behind her and put his hands on her shoulders. "She's not taking her," he said. "I know. It's not a possibility I will accept. I know." He squeezed her shoulders and let go. "Then let's have breakfast." They ate in silence, the three of them. Ellie cutting her biscuit into precise squares and eating them one by one with the same concentration she brought to everything. When she finished, she looked at Maggie and said, "I want to wear my hair braided, the way you do it." Maggie's heart clenched. "All right, I'll braid it for you." She spent the morning doing small, ordinary things: laundry, dishes, a lesson on the slate board. She taught Ellie to spell determined, and Ellie wrote it out 6 times until she got it right without looking at the example. "That's a lot of letters," she said, "but I like the word." "It's a good word," Maggie said. "It means you don't give up." "I know what it means." Ellie set down her chalk. "It means me." The train arrived at 4:15. Maggie heard the whistle from the house, a long, mournful sound that carried across the prairie. She was standing at the window, and she felt her whole body go still. Daniel came to stand beside her. He did not say anything. He just took her hand. "Let's go meet her," he said. They left Ellie with Mrs. Halverson, who had insisted on keeping her for the afternoon. "You don't need her at that meeting," the older woman had said. "You need to face this woman without having to worry about what the child is hearing." Maggie had agreed, but it felt wrong to walk away from Ellie, like leaving a piece of herself behind. The train station was busy. The afternoon train brought passengers and mail and freight, and the platform was crowded with people meeting arrivals, loading crates, calling out greetings. Maggie and Daniel stood at the edge, watching the passengers descend. She did not know what Esther Winthrop looked like, but she knew her when she saw her. She was a tall woman, well-dressed, with a face that had been carved by money and disapproval. She stepped off the train with the air of someone who was not accustomed to waiting, who expected the world to arrange itself around her convenience. She wore a dark dress with a high collar despite the heat, and she carried a small leather bag and an expression of mild distaste for everything she saw. She paused on the platform, surveyed the crowd, and then fixed her eyes on Maggie and Daniel with the accuracy of a hawk spotting prey. "Mr. Brooks," she said. She did not extend her hand. "Mrs. Winthrop," Daniel said. His voice was flat. "I assume this is the woman I've heard so much about." Esther's eyes swept over Maggie with the same distaste she had shown the platform. "You must be the mail-order bride, the one Thomas Reed left on the platform." "I am Margaret Brooks," Maggie said, "Daniel's wife." Esther's eyebrows rose. "I heard you married, rather hastily from what I understand. Convenient timing." "It was the right time," Daniel said. "Shall we go somewhere to talk?" Esther looked around the platform, at the dust and the heat and the people. "Is there somewhere civilized in this town? A hotel, perhaps?" "The boarding house has a parlor," Maggie said. "Mrs. Halverson will let us use it." "Very well, lead the way." They walked through the streets of Clover Falls in a strange procession, Esther slightly ahead, her posture rigid, Maggie and Daniel behind her. People turned to watch. The news had spread. Everyone knew why Esther Winthrop had come. Mrs. Halverson's boarding house was at the north end of town, a large white building with a porch and a parlor that was rarely used but always clean. Mrs. Halverson met them at the door, gave Esther a look that could have curdled milk, and ushered them into the parlor. "I'll bring tea," she said, and disappeared. The parlor was small, furnished with a horsehair sofa and 2 wingback chairs that had seen better decades. Esther chose the larger chair, settling into it with the air of a queen granting an audience. Maggie and Daniel sat on the sofa across from her. The silence stretched. "I'll come straight to the point," Esther said. "I am here to take custody of my niece, Eleanor Brooks. I have the means to provide her with a proper upbringing, a good education, and a future that this town cannot offer. I have retained legal counsel, and I have prepared the necessary documents." She reached into her bag and produced a sheaf of papers. "I expect you to cooperate. If you do not, I will pursue this through the courts, and I assure you I have the resources to do so." Daniel's jaw was tight. "You have not seen Ellie. You have not spoken to her. You have no idea what she wants." "I know what is best for her," Esther said. "I am her blood, her only living blood relative on her mother's side. That carries weight." "Her mother," Maggie said quietly, "is buried in this town. Her father is sitting in front of you. Her home is a quarter-mile from here. She has a mother now." She held up her hand, showing the ring. "She has a family." Esther looked at the ring with an expression of contemptuous amusement. "A marriage of convenience, performed in a judge's chambers 3 days ago, does not undo the fact that you are a stranger to this child. I am her family. You have never written to her. You have never sent a gift, a letter, an inquiry. Not once in 2 years." Maggie's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that she did not try to hide. "You did not come when Sarah died. You did not come when Ellie stopped sleeping. You did not come when she was sick with fever 3 weeks ago, and I sat up with her for 3 nights, cooling her forehead and praying she would live. You are her blood, but I am the one who stayed." Esther's face flickered. For just a moment, something passed across it that might have been doubt. Then it was gone, replaced by the same cool composure. "Sentiment is not the law. The law recognizes the rights of family." "The law also recognizes the best interest of the child," Daniel said, "and I intend to prove that Ellie's best interest is right here, with us." Esther looked at him, and then at Maggie. She folded her hands in her lap and said, "I want to see her." Maggie and Daniel exchanged a glance. "She's with a neighbor," Maggie said. "Then bring her. I want to meet my niece." Esther's voice was firm. "If she is as well cared for as you claim, I will consider that in my decision. But I will not leave this town without seeing her." Maggie felt a knot tighten in her chest. She looked at Daniel, and he nodded. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "We'll bring her to you here." "Very well." Esther stood. "I will be staying at this boarding house. I expect you at 9 o'clock." She did not wait for a response. She walked out of the parlor, her heels clicking on the wooden floor, and left them sitting in the silence. They walked home in the fading light, the heat of the day finally giving way to the cooler evening air. Neither of them spoke. When they reached the house, Mrs. Halverson was on the porch with Ellie, who was drawing in the dirt with a stick. She looked up when they arrived, reading their faces with that uncanny accuracy. "She's here," Ellie said. "Yes," Maggie said. "Did she yell?" "No, she was very calm." Ellie nodded. "That's worse." She stood up and brushed off her dress. "Mama, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Would you be sad if I had to go?" Maggie knelt down and took Ellie's face in her hands. "I would be more than sad. I would be broken. And I will be sad, and I will be broken, before I let that happen." Ellie looked at her for a long moment. Then she put her arms around Maggie's neck and held on tight. "Then I'm not going," she said into Maggie's shoulder. "I already told the mockingbird. He said I was right." Maggie closed her eyes and held the child, the small, fierce, impossible child who had run across a platform and grabbed her hand and refused to let go. She thought about the woman who had stepped off that train, alone, unwanted, with nothing but a letter and a hope. And she thought about how the universe had given her everything she had never dared to ask for. "Let's go inside," she said. "I'll make supper. And tomorrow we'll face her together." Ellie pulled back and looked at her with those dark, steady eyes. "Together," she repeated, and Maggie knew that no matter what happened, she would not be alone again. The next morning they walked to the boarding house at 9 o'clock, the 3 of them. Ellie wore her best dress, the one Maggie had mended and pressed the night before. Her hair was braided the way Maggie had taught her, neat and tight. She held Maggie's hand on one side and Daniel's on the other, and she walked with her chin up and her shoulders back, as if she were going to face a firing squad and had decided she would not flinch. Mrs. Halverson met them at the door. "She's in the parlor. Been pacing since 7. She looked at Ellie and softened. "You ready, girl?" "I'm ready," Ellie said. "Is she scary looking?" "She's got a face like she bit into a lemon. But you faced worse. You faced the fever." Ellie nodded and walked into the parlor. Esther Winthrop was standing by the window, her back to them. She turned when she heard them enter. Her eyes went to Ellie, and something shifted in her expression. For a moment, the mask slipped, and Maggie saw something raw and unexpected. Grief. Then it was gone, replaced by the same cool composure. "So," Esther said, "you are Eleanor." "I'm Ellie." Her voice was clear and steady. "You're my aunt." "I am." Esther looked at her for a long moment. "You look like your mother." Ellie did not flinch. "Everyone says that, but I look like Papa, too." She took a step forward. "Maggie says you came to take me to St. Louis." "I came to offer you a home." "I already have a home." Ellie's voice did not waver. "I have Papa. I have Maggie. I have a room with a window that looks at the creek. I have a mockingbird that comes to the fence every morning. I'm learning to read. Maggie says I'm the best student she's ever had." She paused. "I don't want to go to St. Louis. I don't know you, and I'm not going." The room went very still. Esther stared at the child, her face unreadable. Then she said, "You are 6 years old. You do not know what is best for you." "I'm 6 years old," Ellie said, "and I know what I want. I want to stay here, with my family." Esther looked at Maggie, and there was something in her eyes now that Maggie could not name. It was not anger. It was not contempt. It was something older, something that had been buried for a long time. "May I speak with you alone?" Esther said to Maggie. "Just the two of us." Daniel tensed. Maggie put a hand on his arm. "It's all right." She looked at Ellie. "Wait with your papa outside. I'll be there soon." Ellie hesitated, then nodded. She took Daniel's hand and led him out of the parlor. The door closed behind them. Maggie turned to face Esther. The room was very quiet. "I did not come here to take her," Esther said. The words were so unexpected that Maggie thought she had misheard. "What?" Esther sat down in the wingback chair, and for the first time she looked tired. The mask had slipped entirely, and beneath it was a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. "I did not come here to take her. I came here because I had to know." She looked at her hands. "Sarah was my younger sister. We had not spoken in 10 years, not since she married Daniel Brooks and moved to Texas. I thought she was throwing her life away. I told her so, and she stopped writing." Esther's voice was rough. "When I heard she had died, I told myself it was not my concern. She had made her choice. I had made mine. But I could not stop thinking about the child, about Eleanor." Esther looked up, and her eyes were wet. "I came here to see if she was all right. I came here to make sure. And I have seen that she is." She paused. "More than all right. She is loved. She is happy. She is strong." A bitter smile crossed her face. "She is exactly what Sarah would have wanted her to be." Maggie stood very still. The world had shifted on its axis, and she was still trying to find her footing. "Then why the letters?" Maggie asked. "Why the threats, the lawyer?" Esther's smile turned rueful. "Because I am a proud woman, and I did not know how to admit that I had come all this way to apologize. I thought if I came in strength, I could leave in dignity. I thought I could see her, satisfy myself that she was well, and leave without having to face what I had done." She shook her head. "But then I saw her, and I heard her speak, and I realized that I could not take her from this. I would not." Maggie sat down across from her, the weight of the last 3 days slowly lifting from her shoulders. "You could have told us this yesterday." "I could have," Esther looked at her, "but I needed to see if you would fight for her. And you did. You fought like a mother. That is what I needed to know." She reached into her bag and pulled out the sheaf of papers. She held them out to Maggie. These are the custody documents. They are signed. They are void. Maggie took them, her hands shaking slightly. I don't understand. I have a niece who loves you, Esther said. I have a brother-in-law who looks at you the way a man looks at something he never expected to find. I have seen enough. She stood up. I will stay one more night, and then I will return to St. Louis. But I would like to have supper with my niece tonight if you will allow it. Just once. Maggie looked at the papers in her hands. She looked at Esther, and she saw, beneath the armor, a woman who had traveled 600 miles to make peace with a ghost. Yes, Maggie said, I think that can be arranged. They had supper that evening on the porch, the four of them, with Mrs. Halverson's fried chicken and biscuits, and a pie that the Reverend's wife had sent over. Esther sat beside Ellie and asked her about the mockingbird, about the letters she was learning, about the creek. And Ellie, after a wary start, began to talk. She talked about the day Maggie arrived on the train. She talked about the fever, and how Maggie had sat with her and brought the cold cloths and would not leave. She talked about the ring and the day they became a family. And as she talked, Esther listened. And when Ellie finished, Esther said, Your mother would be proud of you. Ellie looked at her. Do you think so? I know so. Ellie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Would you like to see the mockingbird? Esther smiled. It was a small, uncertain smile, but it was real. I would like that very much. They walked to the fence together, Esther in her city dress, Ellie in her bare feet, and they stood at the fence in the fading light, watching the bird preen on the top rail. And Maggie, standing on the porch with Daniel's arm around her shoulder, watched them and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. That night, after Esther had returned to the boarding house and Ellie was asleep, Maggie and Daniel sat on the porch. The stars were coming out, one by one, and the air was cool and clean. She's not taking her, Daniel said. It was not a question. No, she's not. I don't understand why she came all this way just to leave. I think she came to find something she lost, Maggie said, and I think she found it. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to her. I don't know what I did to deserve you. Nothing, she said. You did nothing. You just opened your door to a stranger and let her stay. He laughed, a low, rough sound. That stranger saved my daughter. Saved me. Maybe we saved each other. He reached for her hand in the darkness, and she gave it to him. They sat like that, holding on, as the stars wheeled overhead and the night settled around them like a promise. The next morning, Esther left on the early train. She stood on the platform, her bag in her hand, and looked at Maggie and Daniel and Ellie standing together. If you ever need anything, she said, anything at all, you send word. We will, Maggie said. Esther looked at Ellie. She knelt down so that her eyes were level with the child's. You are a remarkable girl, Eleanor Brooks. Do not let anyone ever tell you otherwise. Ellie looked at her with those dark, steady eyes. I won't. Esther smiled. Then she stood up, nodded once at Maggie and Daniel, and boarded the train. They watched it pull away, the whistle fading into the distance, the smoke dissolving into the sky. She's not coming back, Ellie said. No, Maggie said. I don't think she is. Good. Ellie took Maggie's hand. Let's go home. They walked back through the streets of Clover Falls, the three of them, the morning sun warm on their faces. People nodded as they passed. Mrs. Pete, sweeping her porch, looked up and smiled. The Reverend, walking to his church, tipped his hat. And Maggie, walking with her family, felt something settle deep in her bones. She was home. But the story was not over. There were still challenges ahead, trials that would test everything they had built. The land had to be worked. The cattle had to be tended. The winter would come with its own hardships. And there were secrets yet buried in the past that would rise up and demand to be reckoned with. But for now, in this moment, they had each other, and that was enough. That afternoon, Ellie asked Maggie to teach her a new word. Maggie thought for a moment, then wrote it on the slate board. Belong. Ellie sounded it out. Belong. It means you're part of something. Yes, Maggie said. It means you're where you're supposed to be. Ellie looked at the word, then at Maggie. She smiled, that slow, deep smile that Maggie had come to love. I know that word, she said. I've known it since the day you came. Maggie pulled her close and held her, and the word on the slate board seemed to glow in the afternoon light. Belong. It was the simplest word in the world, and it was everything. The morning after Esther Winthrop left Clover Falls, the world felt lighter. The air itself seemed different, as if the weight of the threat had been lifted and the sky had room to breathe again. Maggie woke to the sound of birds and the smell of coffee already brewing, and she lay in bed for a moment, letting the peace wash over her. The ring on her finger caught the early light, and she turned it, watching it gleam. It was real. This was real. She got up and dressed and walked into the kitchen to find Daniel at the stove, a sight she had never seen before. He was pouring coffee, his back to her, and he did not turn around when she entered. But she saw his shoulders relax slightly, as if he had been waiting for her to appear and had let go of a tension he had been holding. "You're making coffee," she said. "I thought I'd try." He turned and handed her a cup. "How'd I do?" She took a sip. It was strong, a little bitter, but it was coffee made for her, by him, and it tasted like nothing she had ever had before. "It's perfect." He smiled, a small, real smile, and she realized she had never seen him smile like that before. It changed his whole face. She wanted to see it again. Ellie came in a few minutes later, still in her nightgown, her hair a wild tangle, and she stopped in the doorway and looked at them both with a sleepy assessment. "You're both smiling," she said. "That's weird." She climbed into her chair and reached for the slate board, but then she stopped and looked at Maggie. "Is the lady really gone?" "She's really gone," Maggie said. "She went back to St. Louis." "Good." Ellie picked up her chalk. "Can we have biscuits today? Real ones, with butter." "We can have anything you want today." Ellie considered this. "Then I want biscuits, and I want to learn a new word, and I want to go to the creek after lunch." She looked at Daniel. "And I want Papa to come with us." Daniel looked at Maggie, and there was something in his eyes, a question and an answer all at once. "I think I can manage that." The day unfolded in a way that felt like a gift, ordinary and precious. They made biscuits together, Ellie standing on a chair to reach the counter, her small hands covered in flour. Maggie taught her the word celebration, and Ellie wrote it out 3 times, her tongue pressed to her teeth in concentration. And after lunch, they walked to the creek, the 3 of them, through the tall grass and the afternoon heat, and Ellie waded in the water while Maggie and Daniel sat on the bank and watched. The sun was warm, the water moved, and Maggie thought that this was what happiness felt like. Not a grand emotion, but a quiet settling, like a bird landing in a tree and finding the branch steady. But the peace did not last. It never did, not in the way you hope it will. It was 3 days later when Daniel came in from the far pasture with a look on his face that Maggie had not seen before. It was not anger, not worry, but something in between, a careful blankness that meant he was processing news he did not yet know how to react to. "There's a problem," he said. He sat down at the kitchen table, and Maggie sat across from him. "What kind of problem?" "The fence on the east section is cut, 3 posts pulled out, wire down in 2 places. I lost 7 head before I found the break." "Cut? Not broken by weather?" "Cut," he said the word flatly. "Clean cuts, wire cutters. Someone did it on purpose." Maggie felt a chill run down her spine. "Who would do that?" "I don't know, but I've got suspicions." He rubbed his face. "There's a man named Silas Corbett, owns the spread east of here, past the ridge. He's been eyeing this land for years, ever since Sarah's father passed. He made me an offer once, a low one, and I told him no. He didn't take it well." "Are you sure it's him?" "No, but he's the only one with a reason." Daniel looked at her. "I have to ride out tomorrow and see if I can find those cattle, and I need to talk to Sheriff Dawson. This is the 2nd time in a month someone's tampered with my fence. Last time I thought it was a drifter. Now I'm not so sure." Maggie thought about the peaceful days, the biscuits, the creek. She thought about how quickly something could be taken away. "I'll come with you." "No, you stay with Ellie. I'll be back by nightfall." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I just needed you to know." "I'm glad you told me." He nodded and stood up. "I'm going to check on the barn. Lock the doors tonight." He left, and Maggie sat at the table, looking at the empty coffee cup in front of her. The house felt different now, smaller, less safe. She thought about the woman who had stepped off the train, how she had faced a saloon full of men and a town full of whispers. She had not been afraid then, but she was afraid now, because now she had something to lose. The next morning Daniel rode out at dawn. The sky was gray, the air heavy with the promise of heat. Maggie watched him go from the porch, Ellie beside her, and she felt the weight of the day ahead like a stone in her chest. "Where's Papa going?" Ellie asked. "He has to find some cattle that got lost." "Is it the bad man? The one who cut the fence?" Maggie looked down at her. "How do you know about the fence?" "I heard Papa tell you." "I was in my room, but I heard." Ellie's eyes were serious. "Is he going to hurt Papa?" "No, your Papa can take care of himself." "I know." Ellie was quiet for a moment. "But I don't like it when he goes away." Maggie knelt down and put her hands on Ellie's shoulders. "Neither do I. But he always comes back, you know that." "I know," Ellie nodded slowly. "Can we do lessons now? It helps me not think about it." "Yes, lessons will help me too." They spent the morning at the slate board, Ellie sounding out words with fierce concentration, Maggie teaching her to spell courage and brave and home. The hours passed slowly, the house quiet except for the scratch of chalk and the occasional bird outside. Maggie found herself listening for hoofbeats, for the sound of Daniel returning. The silence stretched. By midday there was still no sign of him. Maggie made lunch, but she could not eat. Ellie ate her biscuit in silence, watching the road from her chair. "He's late," she said. "He said nightfall. It's only noon." Still late. Maggie did not argue. She looked at the road, at the empty horizon, and felt the fear growing. The afternoon crawled by. She put Ellie down for a nap, though the child protested, and then she stood at the window, watching the sun move across the sky. The shadows lengthened, the heat began to fade, and then she saw him. He was riding slowly, his horse walking, his posture slumped. Even from a distance she could tell something was wrong. She ran out the door and down the lane, her heart pounding. When she reached him, she saw the blood on his sleeve, dark and wet, spreading from a tear in his shirt. "Daniel." "Caught me off guard," he said. His voice was rough, tired. "I found the cattle, and I found Corbett." She helped him dismount, her hands steady even as her insides churned. He leaned on her as they walked to the house, his weight heavy, his breath coming in short gasps. She got him inside, sat him at the table, and cut away his sleeve. The wound was a gash, not deep but long, bleeding steadily. It looked like it had been made by a knife. "Tell me what happened." He closed his eyes. "I found the cattle on Corbett's land. He claimed they were his. I told him they were mine. He had 2 men with him. They didn't give me a chance to walk away. He attacked you." "3 of them." He opened his eyes. "I got 1 good hit in, then I ran. Stupid maybe, but I'd rather be alive and stupid than dead and right." She cleaned the wound with water and whiskey, the way she had learned in the boarding house, when the cook's husband had come home bloody from a fight. Daniel winced, but did not make a sound. She bound it with strips of clean cloth, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "You need to see a doctor." "No, I need to see the sheriff. Tomorrow. Tonight you rest." He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that she could not name. "You're not afraid." "I'm terrified," she said, "but being terrified doesn't help anyone." She finished the bandage and sat back. "What do we do now?" "Tomorrow, I ride to town. I see the sheriff. I file a complaint." He winced as he moved his arm. "And then I figure out what to do about Silas Corbett." She stayed with him that night, sitting in the rocking chair beside his bed, watching him sleep. Ellie had come in and seen the bandage and had not cried. She had simply said, "Papa's hurt," and then she had climbed onto the bed and curled up next to him, her small hand on his chest. He had opened his eyes, seen her, and smiled. Then they both fell asleep. Maggie watched them, and she thought about the fight ahead. She thought about Silas Corbett, a man she had never met but already hated. She thought about the fence, the cattle, the blood on Daniel's arm. And she thought about what it meant to be a family, to protect what you loved, to stand your ground when the world tried to push you off it. The next morning they went to town. Daniel's arm was stiff, but he could move it. Maggie drove the wagon, Ellie between them, and they rode in silence, the road empty and the sky wide. Sheriff Dawson was a large man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. He listened to Daniel's account without interrupting, his face unreadable. When Daniel finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Corbett's been trouble for years," he said, "but he's clever. He won't admit to anything, and his men will back him up. There's 3 of them and 1 of me. They cut my fence, stole my cattle, and attacked me on my own land." Daniel's voice was tight. "That has to count for something." "It counts. But proving it is another matter." The sheriff rubbed his chin. "I'll ride out and talk to him. That's all I can do for now. If he pushes back, I'll need more than your word." "What about witnesses? You got any?" Daniel was silent. He looked at Maggie, and she saw the frustration in his eyes. They had no witnesses. It had been just him, alone in the pasture. "I'll see what I can do," the sheriff said. "In the meantime, keep your eyes open. And if he comes near your place again, you send word." They left the sheriff's office and stood on the boardwalk, the sun hot on their faces. Ellie was sitting on a bench, swinging her legs, watching a dog chase a chicken. For a moment, Maggie wished she could be that simple, that focused on small things. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We go home, we mend the fence, and we wait." Daniel looked at the horizon. "But I'm not going to just wait. I'm going to make sure that if he comes again, he'll regret it." They spent the next week repairing the fence, reinforcing the weak spots, setting watch in the evenings. Daniel slept with his rifle by the bed, and Maggie learned to load it, to hold it steady. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she learned. Because the thought of not being able to protect her family was worse than the thought of using it. The tension wore on all of them. Ellie stopped talking about the mockingbird. She did her lessons quietly, without her usual questions. She watched the horizon the way Maggie did, with the same guarded hope that nothing would appear. And then, one evening, a rider came up the lane. It was not Silas Corbett. It was a boy, 16 maybe, with a face that was trying hard to look older than it was. He handed Maggie a letter and rode away without a word. The letter was from a lawyer in San Antonio. It said that Thomas Reed, before he left Clover Falls, had filed a claim against Daniel's land, a claim that had been sitting in the county records, unnoticed. The claim was based on an old debt that Reed said Daniel owed him from a cattle deal 3 years ago. The debt had never been paid. And now, Reed had sold that claim to a man named Silas Corbett. Maggie read the letter twice. Then she went inside and handed it to Daniel. He read it, and his face went pale. Then he went very still. "He sold my land," Daniel said. "Reed sold my land to Corbett, and I didn't even know it. Can he do that?" "The debt was real. I owed him money from a bad deal. I paid it back, but I don't have a receipt. It was cash, hand to hand. There's no record." He set the letter down. "Corbett has a legal claim. At least in his mind he does. He'll take it to court. Then we fight it." "With what? I have no proof I paid the debt. He has a piece of paper." Daniel looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she had not seen before. Despair. "He's going to take everything." Maggie stood very still. She thought about the train platform, the heat, the laughter. She thought about how far she had come, and she thought about how she had not come this far to lose everything now. "No," she said, "he's not." She went to the bedroom and pulled out the small tin box she had carried from Missouri, the one that held her mother's thimble and 2 photographs. She had not opened it since she arrived. She lifted the lid and removed the photographs, and beneath them, folded at the bottom of the box, was a piece of paper, a receipt. It was for a cattle deal, signed by Thomas Reed and Daniel Brooks, with a note in the margin in Reed's own handwriting. "Paid in full, received." Maggie had found it on the platform the day she arrived, after everyone had gone. It had been lying in the dust, trampled, half hidden. She had picked it up without thinking, without knowing why. And she had kept it. She did not know why she had kept it. She had told herself it was nothing, a scrap of paper from a man who had wronged her, a piece of evidence that she did not need. But now she knew. She had kept it because she had known, somewhere deep, that the story was not over. She walked back into the kitchen and held out the paper. Daniel took it, read it. His hands began to shake. "Where did you find this?" "On the platform, the day I arrived. It was on the ground, near where he had been standing." Maggie's voice was steady. He must have dropped it. Daniel looked at her, and there were tears in his eyes. He dropped it. And you picked it up. I picked it up. He stood up, pulled her into his arms, and held her so tight she could barely breathe. She held him back, and they stood in the kitchen, the receipt between them, the proof that the debt had been paid, that the land was theirs, that the fight was not lost. The next morning, Daniel rode to town with the receipt. He showed it to the sheriff, who showed it to the judge. And that afternoon, a deputy rode out to Silas Corbett's land and served him with papers stating that his claim was invalid, that the debt had been satisfied, that the land belonged to Daniel Brooks. Maggie heard the news from Mrs. Halverson, who came to the house with a loaf of bread and a smile. "Corbett's packing," she said. "Left this morning. Told everyone he'd been cheated, but nobody believes him. The receipt is ironclad." Maggie sat down at the table. She felt the weight of the last week leave her body all at once, like a door swinging open. And Reed? Reed left town weeks ago. Nobody knows where he is. But the sheriff put a warrant out for him. If he ever shows his face in this county again, he'll be arrested. Mrs. Halverson set the bread on the table. "You did good, Maggie. You saved this family." "I saved a piece of paper," Maggie said. "That piece of paper saved this family." "But you saved it first." That night they had supper on the porch, the three of them, watching the sun set over the prairie. The sky was gold and orange and red, and the air was cool and clean. Ellie ate her biscuit and fed pieces to the mockingbird, who had appeared on the fence post as if he knew the crisis was over. "Papa," Ellie said, "are we safe now?" Daniel looked at Maggie. "Yes," he said, "we're safe." "Good." Ellie leaned against Maggie's arm. "I was getting tired of being scared." "I was too," Maggie said, "but it's over now." They sat in silence as the sun went down, the stars coming out one by one, and Maggie thought about the receipt, the piece of paper she had picked up on a train platform without knowing why. She thought about how the universe sometimes gives you what you need before you know you need it. She thought about Thomas Reed, who had left her standing alone, and how his carelessness had given her the tool to save everything she loved. She thought about the boy who brought the letter, about how a series of choices, each one small, each one uncertain, had led her here, to this porch, to this family, to this moment. And she thought about the ring on her finger, and the word Ellie had learned that afternoon, destiny. She had spelled it wrong twice, and then the third time she had gotten it right. "D-E-S-T-I-N-Y, she had said. "It means you're supposed to be here." "Yes," Maggie had said, "it does." She looked at the stars and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. She was supposed to be here. The peace that settled over the Brooks homestead after Silas Corbett's departure was not the peace of a finished story. It was the peace of a held breath, the quiet between storms. Maggie felt it in the way she checked the horizon more often than she needed to, in the way Daniel kept his rifle closer to the door, in the way Ellie stopped asking questions about the bad man and started watching the road with a stillness that was too old for her years. The family had survived. But survival left marks that did not show on the skin. It was 2 weeks after the sheriff had served Corbett with the papers, 2 weeks of mending fence and repairing the barn and trying to find a rhythm that felt like normal, when the letter arrived. This one was not from a lawyer or a distant aunt or a man with a claim. It was from a woman named Clara Maynard, and it was addressed to Maggie, care of the Clover Falls post office. Mrs. Halverson brought it to the house with a raised eyebrow and a look that said she had already read the return address and formed an opinion. "Who's Clara Maynard?" Mrs. Halverson asked, holding the letter out. "I don't know," Maggie said. She took the letter, turned it over in her hands. The handwriting was careful and neat, the paper good quality. She did not recognize the name. She opened it while Mrs. Halverson watched with undisguised curiosity, and she read it standing in the doorway with the afternoon sun slanting across the page. The letter was from her past. Clara Maynard had been a boarder at the same house in Missouri where Maggie had worked. She had stayed for 6 months 5 years ago, a woman fleeing a bad marriage, with a small child and a trunk full of secrets. Maggie had helped her, had hidden her from the husband who came looking, had lied to protect her. They had not spoken since Clara left one night without warning, slipping out the back door with her child and disappearing into the dark. Now, Clara had found her. She wrote that she had heard through a chain of acquaintances that Maggie had married and settled in Texas. She wrote that she was in trouble again, that her past had caught up with her, and she wrote that she was coming to Clover Falls because she had nowhere else to go. Maggie read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. Mrs. Halverson was still watching. Bad news? I don't know yet. Maggie looked out at the road, the empty horizon. An old friend. She's coming to visit. Friend from where? Missouri. A long time ago. Mrs. Halverson nodded slowly, the way she did when she was filing away information for later use. Well, I hope she finds what she's looking for. She turned and walked back toward town, leaving Maggie standing alone with the letter in her pocket and the weight of a promise she had made years ago pressing on her chest. She did not tell Daniel about the letter that night. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment, that he had enough to worry about, that Clara might not even come. But the truth was simpler and harder. She was afraid. Afraid of what Clara's arrival might bring, afraid of the past reaching into her present, afraid that the life she had built might be more fragile than she wanted to admit. The days passed. Maggie kept the letter folded in the pocket of her apron, touching it sometimes when she thought no one was watching. She taught Ellie her lessons, made supper, mended the curtains. She watched the road. And then, on a Thursday evening, when the light was long and golden and the air was cooling into dusk, a wagon came up the lane. It was a battered thing, pulled by a horse that looked like it had been pushed too hard for too long. The woman driving it was thin, worn, her face lined with years and worry. Beside her sat a boy of about 8, with the same tired eyes and the same set to his jaw. Maggie knew her instantly. Clara Maynard had changed, but the change was only the surface. The same fear was there, the same vigilance, the same careful way she held herself, as if she expected to be struck at any moment. Maggie walked out to meet her. Clara climbed down from the wagon slowly, like her joints hurt, like she had been sitting still for too long. She looked at Maggie, and her face crumpled. "You came," Maggie said. "I didn't know where else to go." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't know if you'd remember me." "I remember." The boy climbed down and stood close to his mother, watching Maggie with the guarded eyes of a child who had learned not to trust strangers. Clara put her hand on his shoulder. "This is Samuel. Samuel, this is the woman I told you about, the one who helped us." Samuel looked at Maggie. "Are you going to hide us again?" The question was so direct, so matter-of-fact, that Maggie felt her throat tighten. "If you need hiding," she said, "then yes." Daniel came out of the barn. He had seen the wagon from the field and had come to investigate. He stopped a few feet away, taking in the scene. The worn woman, the quiet boy, the look on Maggie's face that he had not seen before. "Who's this?" he asked. His voice was neutral, but Maggie could hear the question underneath. "Clara Maynard," Maggie said. "She's a friend from Missouri. She needs a place to stay." Daniel looked at Clara, then at the boy, then at Maggie. He did not ask questions. He simply nodded. "We've got a spare room." "It's not much, but it's clean." Clara's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. I don't have money to pay, but I can work. I can cook, clean, anything." "We'll figure it out," Daniel said. "Come inside. I'll get your things." That night they sat around the kitchen table, the 5 of them, eating a supper that Maggie had stretched to feed 2 extra mouths. Clara ate slowly, carefully, as if she was not used to having enough. Samuel ate the same way, watching the adults, saying nothing. Ellie watched Samuel with open curiosity, the way she watched everything, filing away observations for later use. After supper, Daniel took Samuel out to see the barn. He did it without being asked, sensing that Clara needed to talk. Maggie sat across from Clara at the table, the dishes pushed aside, the lamp flickering between them. "Tell me," Maggie said. Clara closed her eyes. "He found me, the man I ran from. He found me 6 months ago in a town called Benton. I thought I had covered my tracks. I thought I was safe." She shook her head. "But he has money, and he has connections, and he has never stopped looking. He wants Samuel. He says I'm unfit, that I stole the boy from him, that he has a legal right. Does he? No, he beat me for 10 years. He beat Samuel until I finally got the courage to leave. There is no court in the country that would give him custody if they knew the truth. Clara's voice cracked. But he has a lawyer, and I have nothing. He found me in Benton. I ran again. I traveled for 3 weeks, sleeping in fields, hiding during the day. I came here because I didn't know where else to go. I came here because you were the only person who ever helped me without wanting something in return. Maggie reached across the table and took Clara's hand. You can stay as long as you need. We'll figure out what to do. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. You already brought it, and I'm not sending you away. Maggie squeezed her hand. You helped me once, Clara, do you remember? When I was sick, and the landlady wanted to throw me out. You sat with me. You brought me soup. You didn't have to do that. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You remember that? I remember everything. They sat in silence for a moment, the past and the present meeting in the lamplight. Then Clara said, His name is Edward Vance. He's a merchant. He has money and influence. He'll come looking for me. It's only a matter of time. Then we'll be ready. The next few days were a careful dance of integration. Clara threw herself into work, scrubbing floors, mending clothes, helping with the garden. She spoke little, but her hands were always busy. Samuel followed her like a shadow, quiet and watchful. Ellie, after a day of cautious observation, decided that Samuel was acceptable and began to talk to him. At first he did not respond, but Ellie was persistent. She showed him the mockingbird, the creek, the slate board. By the third day, Samuel spoke a full sentence. I like your bird. Ellie beamed as if she had won a great victory. Daniel watched all of it with the careful assessment of a man weighing risks. He asked Maggie about Clara one evening, after the others had gone to bed. Are we in danger? I don't know, Maggie said honestly. The man she's running from sounds dangerous, but I couldn't turn her away. I'm not asking you to, I just want to know what we're facing. Clara says he has money and connections. He might hire someone to track her. He might come himself. Maggie looked at Daniel. I would understand if you wanted her to leave. This is your home, your daughter. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. This is your home too. And you decided she stays, so she stays. That was all. He did not argue, did not question. He simply accepted her decision. And in that acceptance, Maggie felt a love so deep it made her chest ache. 2 weeks passed. Clara and Samuel began to settle into the rhythm of the household. Samuel helped with the animals, slowly coming out of his shell. Clara cooked meals that reminded Maggie of Missouri, rich and hearty. The house felt full in a way it had not before, full of voices and footsteps and the small sounds of people living together. And then Edward Vance arrived. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Maggie was in the garden, pulling weeds, when she heard the sound of a horse coming fast. She looked up to see a man riding down the lane, well-dressed, with a face that was handsome in the way that wealth makes handsome. He was alone. He reined in at the gate and looked at the house with an expression of cold assessment. Maggie stood up, her hands dirty, her heart pounding. She did not call out. She waited. The man dismounted and walked toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped a few feet away and looked at her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. I'm looking for a woman named Clara Maynard, he said. I believe she's here. I don't know anyone by that name. Don't lie to me. The smile did not waver. I've tracked her for 3 weeks. I know she came here. I know you're hiding her. He took a step closer. I am Edward Vance. Clara is my wife, and she has taken my son. I have legal documents that prove my custody rights. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. I can show you. Maggie looked at the paper, but she did not take it. If you have legal documents, then you can go to the sheriff. I'm sure he'll be happy to help you. The sheriff in this town is a friend of yours, I hear. Vance's voice was smooth, but there was an edge underneath. I don't think he'll be impartial. Then you don't know Sheriff Dawson? Vance's smile tightened. He looked past her at the house, and Maggie saw his eyes land on the window where Clara's face had appeared for just a moment before disappearing. He had seen her. She's there, he said. I know it. She's not. He looked at Maggie, and the mask slipped. For just a second, she saw the man Clara had described, cold, violent, accustomed to getting what he wanted. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I will come back with the law, and when I do, you will be the one in trouble." He turned, mounted his horse, and rode away without looking back. Maggie stood in the garden, her hands shaking, watching the dust settle on the road. She went inside. Clara was standing at the window, her face pale. Samuel was behind her, holding her skirt, his eyes wide. "He saw me," Clara said. "He did. What do we do?" Maggie thought about the sheriff, about Daniel, about the life they had built. She thought about the receipt she had found on the platform, about the way the universe sometimes put things in your path that you did not understand until later. "We fight," she said. "We stay together, and we don't let him take you." Daniel came in from the barn a few minutes later. Maggie told him what had happened. He listened in silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he said, "I'll ride to town tonight. I'll talk to the sheriff. And I'll find out what Vance's legal standing really is." He rode out at dusk, and Maggie waited. She put Clara and Samuel in the spare room, told them to stay inside. She sat at the kitchen table with Ellie, reading a book by lamplight, her ears tuned to the sound of hoofbeats on the road. The hours passed slowly. Ellie fell asleep on the floor with her head on a pillow, and Maggie covered her with a blanket and sat back down to wait. It was after midnight when Daniel returned. She heard the horse before she saw him, and she was at the door before he dismounted. His face was grim. "Vance wasn't lying about the documents. He has a court order from Missouri granting him custody of Samuel. It's dated 6 months ago. It looks legitimate. But Clara said he beat them." "She did." Daniel sat down at the table, his shoulders heavy. "The sheriff made some calls. There's a record of complaints against Vance, but they were dismissed. He has influence. And the court order is signed by a judge in St. Louis. If he takes this to court here, he'll likely win." Maggie sat down across from him. The lamp flickered. The house was still. "Then we hide them," she said. "Hide them where?" "There are places. The old line shack on the east pasture. Nobody goes there. We can take them at night before Vance returns." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "You know what you're asking. If we're caught hiding them, we could be charged with kidnapping. We could lose everything." "I know. And you're still willing." She looked at him, and she thought about Clara, about the soup she had brought when Maggie was sick, about the kindness that had cost Clara nothing and meant everything. She thought about Samuel, who had barely spoken in 2 weeks, who flinched when someone raised their voice. She thought about the platform, about being left alone, about the people who had looked through her and decided she was not worth the trouble. "Yes," she said, "I'm willing." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we do it." The decision to hide Clara and Samuel was made in the dark, by lamplight, with the weight of everything they had already survived pressing down on them. Daniel did not hesitate after Maggie said yes. He stood up, pulled on his coat, and walked out to the barn to saddle the horses. Maggie woke Clara and Samuel with a hand on their shoulders and a quiet voice that did not leave room for argument. "We're moving you, tonight. Get your things." Clara did not ask questions. She had been running long enough to understand that questions cost time. She woke Samuel, who looked at Maggie with those wary eyes, and said nothing. They were packed in 5 minutes, their belongings fitting into a single bag. Maggie led them out the back door, through the garden, past the fence line where the mockingbird slept. The moon was a thin sliver, barely enough light to see by, but Daniel knew the land in the dark the way other men knew their own hands. The line shack was 1.5 miles east, at the edge of the pasture where the land began to rise toward the ridge. It had not been used in years, not since Sarah's father had run cattle on this section. The roof sagged in the middle, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. But it was shelter, it was hidden, and it was theirs. Daniel pushed the door open and struck a match. The light revealed a single room with a cot, a stove that had rusted into silence, and a shelf that held nothing but dust. It was not much. But Clara looked at it with an expression that Maggie recognized. The relief of a woman who had been sleeping in fields and barns, and had finally found a roof, even a leaking one. "It's safe," Daniel said quietly. "Nobody comes out here. I'll bring supplies in the morning, before light. You stay inside during the day. Don't light the stove until after dark. The smoke carries. Clara nodded. She pulled Samuel close. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Maggie said. "You just have to stay alive." They left them there, with a blanket and a jug of water and a promise to return at dawn. The walk back was silent, the stars cold and distant, the prairie stretching out dark on all sides. Maggie felt the weight of what they had done settle into her chest, heavy and permanent. She was no longer just a woman who had married a rancher and taken in a child. She was a woman who had broken the law to protect a friend, and she would do it again. The days that followed were a careful performance. Maggie went through the motions of daily life with a calm she did not feel. She taught Ellie her letters, made meals, tended the garden. But every morning before first light, she slipped out of the house with a basket of food and a jar of water, walking the 1.5 miles to the line shack while the world was still gray and sleeping. She stayed long enough to check on Clara and Samuel, to see that they were alive, to feel the weight of their need pressing on her. Then she walked back before the sun cleared the horizon. Samuel was the one who worried her most. He had stopped speaking entirely. He sat in the corner of the shack with his knees pulled to his chest, watching the door, watching his mother, watching the thin line of light that came through the cracks in the wall. Clara tried to coax him out of it, but he was retreating into himself, the way children do when the world has shown them too much of its cruelty. "He was talking," Clara said one morning, her voice ragged. "At your house. He was talking to Ellie. He said he liked the bird. I haven't heard him say a word since we came here." "He's scared," Maggie said. "He'll come back. Give him time." "Time," Clara laughed, a bitter sound. "Time is the one thing I don't have." On the 4th day, the trouble arrived. Maggie was in the garden when she saw the dust on the road, the unmistakable shape of a rider coming fast. She straightened, shielding her eyes from the sun, and recognized the horse before she recognized the man. It was Sheriff Dawson, and he was riding alone. She met him at the gate. He dismounted slowly, the way a man does when he is not in a hurry to deliver bad news. He took off his hat and looked at her with those eyes that had seen too much. "Maggie," he said, "I need to talk to you." "We're talking." "Inside would be better." She led him into the kitchen, where Ellie was working on her slate board. She sent Ellie to her room with a look, and the child went without protest, her dark eyes flickering between the sheriff and Maggie with that unsettling awareness. Sheriff Dawson sat down at the table. He did not take coffee. He folded his hands in front of him and said, "Edward Vance came to see me. He has a court order from Missouri, signed by a judge, giving him custody of his son. He says Clara Maynard is here, in this house." "She's not." "I know that's what you're going to say." He looked at her steadily. "But I have to ask. I have to do my job. If I don't, he'll bring in a federal marshal, and then things get complicated." "Things are already complicated." Maggie sat down across from him. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me the truth." He leaned forward. "I've known you for months now. I know what kind of woman you are. You took in a child who wasn't yours. You nursed half the town through a fever. You married a good man, and you've made a home here. I don't believe you'd lie to me unless you had a good reason." Maggie looked at him. She thought about Clara, about Samuel, about the bruises she had seen on Clara's arms when she reached for the water jug. She thought about the court order that gave a violent man the right to take a child who was terrified of him. "She's not here," Maggie said, "but I know where she is." Sheriff Dawson's expression did not change. "Tell me." "I can't." "Maggie, if I tell you, he'll take Samuel, and Samuel will go back to a man who beats him." Her voice was steady, but there was iron in it. "I have seen what that does to a child. I will not be the one who sends him back." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. He rubbed his face with both hands, the way a man does when he is caught between duty and conscience. Then he said, "I'm going to tell Vance that I searched the property and found nothing. I'm going to tell him that Clara must have moved on. That's what I'm going to tell him." Maggie held her breath. "But if he brings a federal marshal, I won't be able to protect you. You understand that?" "I understand." He stood up and put his hat back on. "I don't know where she is. I don't want to know. But if she needs to leave, you help her leave, before this gets any bigger than it already is." He walked out without another word. Maggie watched him ride away, and she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had bought time, but time was running out. That night she walked to the line shack under a sky thick with clouds. The air was heavy, the kind of heavy that promised rain before morning. She found Clara sitting on the cot, Samuel asleep in her lap, her face hollow with exhaustion. "The sheriff came today," Maggie said. Clara's eyes went wide. "He knows? He knows I'm hiding you. He chose not to press it. But he won't be able to do that forever." Maggie sat down on the floor across from her. "You need to think about what comes next." "I've been thinking about nothing else." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I can't go back to him. I will die before I go back to him. And I will kill him before I let him take Samuel." "Don't say that." "It's true." Clara looked at her, and there was something in her eyes that Maggie had never seen before. A hardness, a resolve. "I've been running for 5 years. I'm tired. I'm so tired, Maggie. But I'm not going to let him win." Maggie reached out and took her hand. "Then we find another way, a legal way, a way that doesn't involve you running for the rest of your life." "There is no legal way. He has money. He has a judge. I have nothing." "You have us." Maggie squeezed her hand. "You have me. You have Daniel. You have people who will fight for you." Clara looked at her for a long moment. Then she bowed her head, and the tears came, silent and shaking. Maggie held her while she cried, and the rain began to fall outside, drumming on the roof, filling the silence with its steady rhythm. The next morning the rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray. Maggie was in the barn, milking the cow, when Daniel came in with a look that stopped her cold. "Vance is back," he said. "He brought a man with him, a detective from St. Louis." Maggie set down the bucket. "Where are they now?" "In town, at the boarding house. The sheriff sent word. He says they're planning to search every property within 5 miles, starting tomorrow." Maggie wiped her hands on her apron. Her mind was already moving, calculating distances, timing, options. "We have to move them." "Move them where?" She thought about the ridge, about the old line shack, about the open prairie that offered no cover and no mercy. And then she thought about something she had not considered before. The cave. The one that Sarah's father had used as a storm shelter, half a mile past the line shack, hidden in the side of a hill. She had seen it once, during a walk with Daniel. He had pointed it out, said it had not been used in years. "There's a cave," she said, "past the shack, near the ridge." Daniel's face shifted. "It's small, damp, not much better than the shack. But it's hidden. Even if they search the shack, they won't find the cave unless they know it's there." She stood up. "We moved them tonight, after dark." They moved them in the rain. It had started again, a cold drizzle that soaked through coats and turned the ground to mud. Samuel clung to his mother's hand, his small face pinched against the weather. Clara moved with the mechanical determination of a woman who had stopped feeling the cold. Maggie led the way, a lantern hidden under her coat, its light barely enough to see the path. Daniel brought up the rear, carrying the bag of supplies, his eyes scanning the darkness. The cave was smaller than she remembered. The entrance was low, hidden behind a tangle of brush that had grown thick over the years. Inside, the air was damp and cold, but it was dry. The floor was packed earth. There was room to sit, to lie down, to wait. Clara looked around the small space. She did not complain. She simply set down her bag and began arranging the blankets they had brought. "Samuel," she said, "help me spread these out." Samuel moved to help, his small hands grabbing the corner of a blanket. He did not look at Maggie or Daniel. He did not look at anything but the task in front of him. Maggie knelt beside Clara. "I'll come every morning, before light. If I don't come, it means it's not safe. Stay hidden. Don't leave for any reason." Clara nodded. "How long?" "I don't know. A few days, a week, until the detective leaves or we find another way." Clara looked at her, and there was something in her eyes that Maggie had never seen before. Not despair, not fear, something harder, something that looked like gratitude but sharper. "You didn't have to do this," Clara said. "You could have turned me away." "I know. Why didn't you?" Maggie thought about the platform, the heat, the laughter. She thought about the child who had run across the boards with both hands out. She thought about all the time she had been alone, and all the time someone had reached out and pulled her back. "Because no one should have to face this alone," she said, "and because you showed me kindness once, when I had nothing. I don't forget that." Clara's face crumpled. She did not cry, she just nodded, once, and turned back to arranging the blankets. They left them there, in the dark and the damp, and walked back through the rain. The house was quiet when they returned, Ellie asleep, the fire banked. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, dripping water onto the floor, and stared at the wall. Daniel sat across from her. "We can't keep this up forever," he said. "I know. Sooner or later they'll find her. Maybe," she looked at him, "but maybe not. Maybe we can find a lawyer. Maybe we can find someone who can fight that court order." "With what money?" She did not have an answer. The money they had was stretched thin. Every penny counted. But she could not let Clara be taken. She could not. "I'll think of something," she said. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. "I know you will." The days that followed were a holding pattern, tense and fragile. Maggie made her morning trips to the cave, bringing food and water, staying long enough to see that Clara and Samuel were alive, then leaving before the sun rose. She told Ellie that Clara and Samuel had gone to stay with friends, and Ellie accepted this with the suspicious ease of a child who knew she was not being told everything, but chose not to push. The detective, a man named Hawks, searched the property twice. He questioned Maggie each time, his eyes sharp, his voice polite. She answered his questions with the same calm steadiness she had used when she walked into the saloon to face Thomas Reed. She gave him nothing. But the strain was wearing on all of them. Daniel slept less, ate less, watched the horizon with a vigilance that bordered on obsession. Clara was fading, her face growing thinner, her eyes more hollow. And Samuel had stopped eating altogether. Maggie watched him shrink into himself day by day, and she felt the clock ticking towards something she could not stop. On the 6th day, she arrived at the cave to find Clara sitting outside, in the open, her face turned up to the gray sky. "They're gone," Clara said. "Who's gone?" "The detective. He left on the morning train. The sheriff told me." Maggie felt the world tilt. "He told you?" "I went to town, last night, after you left." Clara looked at her, and there was something wild in her eyes, something that had been pushed too far. "I couldn't stay in that cave anymore, Maggie. I couldn't. I went to the sheriff and I told him everything. I told him about the beatings, about the years of running, about the court order. I told him I would rather go to prison than let Edward take Samuel." Maggie sat down heavily on the ground. "What did he say?" "He listened. He took notes. And then he told me that the detective had been called back to St. Louis, that there was some kind of problem with Vance's court order, that a judge in Missouri had opened an investigation into Vance's conduct." Clara's voice cracked. "He said I might not have to run anymore." Maggie stared at her. The words did not make sense at first. They came together slowly, like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered. "An investigation," Maggie repeated. "The sheriff didn't know the details, but he said a woman named Esther Winthrop had filed a complaint, that she had connections in St. Louis, that she had used them to look into Vance's background." Esther Winthrop. The name landed like a stone in still water. Maggie thought of the woman in the city dress, who had come to take Ellie and left without her. The woman who had said, "If you ever need anything, you send word." She had sent word. Not directly, not with a letter or a telegram, but through the invisible network of a story that had traveled, a story that had reached Esther Winthrop and moved her to act. "She did it," Maggie whispered. "She did it for us." Clara looked at her, confused. "Who?" "Esther Winthrop, Ellie's aunt." Maggie stood up, her heart pounding. "She came here to take Ellie, and she left because she saw that Ellie was loved. And now she's done this. She's fought for you, without even knowing you." Clara stared at her. "I don't understand." "Neither do I." Maggie laughed, a broken, joyful sound. "But I think it's over. I think you're safe." They walked back to the house together, Clara holding Samuel's hand, Maggie leading the way. The sun had broken through the clouds, and the prairie was golden and warm. Daniel met them at the gate, his face questioning. Maggie took his hand and told him what had happened. He listened, and then he pulled her close and held her, and she felt the last of the tension drain out of her body. That night, they had supper together, all 5 of them, around the worn kitchen table. Samuel ate a whole biscuit without being coaxed. Clara laughed at something Ellie said, a real laugh, not a bitter one. And Maggie sat at the head of the table, with Daniel beside her, and she thought about the chain of events that had brought them all here. The letter from Thomas Reed, the platform, the child who ran forward with both hands, the receipt in the dust, the aunt who had come and gone and come again in a different way to save them. It was not a straight line. It was not a story she could have written, but it was hers. It was theirs, and it was still unfolding. Later that night, after Clara and Samuel had gone to bed in the spare room, after Ellie had been tucked in with a story and a kiss, Maggie sat on the porch with Daniel. The stars were out, thousands of them, scattered across the black sky like seeds waiting to grow. "Esther Winthrop," she said, "I never would have thought." "She's a good woman," Daniel said. "She just needed to be reminded of it." Maggie leaned against him. "Do you think it's really over? The running? The fear?" "I think it's over for now." He put his arm around her. "And that's enough." They sat in silence, the night air cool and clean. And for the first time in weeks, Maggie felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. But even as the stars wheeled overhead, a new darkness was gathering, unseen beyond the ridge. A man who had been waiting, patient and silent, watching the Brooks house from a distance. He had been hired by Edward Vance before the investigation had begun, before the detective had been called back, before the tide had turned. He was a man who did not ask questions, who did not read court orders, who only followed instructions, and his instructions were to take the boy. He waited until the house was dark, until the last lamp was extinguished. Then he moved. The man moved through the darkness with the practiced silence of someone who had done this before. He knew how to avoid the loose boards on the porch, how to lift the latch on the door without a sound, how to step around the furniture in a room he had never seen. He had been watching the house for 3 days, long enough to learn the layout through the windows, long enough to know which room held the boy. Vance had paid him well, half up front, half on delivery. The job was simple: take the child, leave the woman. No witnesses, no complications. He was 3 steps into the kitchen when his foot caught on the edge of the rug that Maggie had laid down the week before, a rug that had not been there during his surveillance. He stumbled, caught himself on the table, and the coffee cup that had been left out tipped over and shattered on the floor. The sound was sharp and sudden, cutting through the silence like a gunshot. The man froze. From the bedroom he heard a voice, Maggie's voice, sharp with alarm. "Who's there?" He had lost the element of surprise. He moved fast now, no longer silent, pushing through the hallway toward the spare room where Clara and Samuel slept. He threw open the door. Clara was sitting up, her eyes wide. Samuel pressed against her side. She opened her mouth to scream, and he crossed the room in 2 strides and clamped his hand over her face. "Quiet," he said. "I'm here for the boy. You don't make a sound, and I leave you alive." Daniel was already moving. He had been asleep in the main bedroom, but the sound of breaking glass had jerked him awake, and he was reaching for the rifle beside the bed before his eyes were fully open. Maggie was right behind him, her heart pounding, her hands already reaching for the lamp. "Don't light it," Daniel hissed. "He'll see us coming." They moved through the dark house, Daniel with the rifle raised, Maggie following close. They heard the struggle before they saw it, a muffled cry from Clara, the sound of feet scuffling on the floor. Daniel reached the doorway and saw the shape of a man holding Clara, one hand over her mouth, the other reaching for Samuel, who had scrambled off the bed and was pressed into the corner. "Let her go," Daniel said. His voice was low and steady, the voice of a man who had already decided what he was willing to do. The man turned. In the faint light from the window, Daniel could see his face, hard and expressionless, the face of a man who had been paid to do a job and did not care about the consequences. "I'm taking the boy," he said. "You can either get out of my way or I'll go through you." Daniel did not answer. He raised the rifle and aimed it at the man's chest. "I won't tell you again." The man looked at the rifle. He looked at Daniel. And then he shoved Clara hard, sending her crashing into the wall, and lunged for Samuel. The boy screamed, a high, piercing sound that cut through the night like a blade. Daniel fired. The shot was deafening in the small room, the muzzle flash lighting up the scene for a fraction of a second. The man staggered, clutching his shoulder, but he did not go down. He was still moving, still reaching for the boy, his face twisted with pain and fury. Maggie acted without thinking. She grabbed the lamp from the table, the one she had lit earlier and set aside, and she swung it with both hands, catching the man across the side of the head. Glass shattered, oil spilled, and the man crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The room fell silent. The only sound was Samuel's crying, high and broken, and Clara's ragged breathing as she pulled herself up from the floor. Daniel stood over the man, the rifle still aimed, his hands shaking. Maggie dropped the remains of the lamp and knelt beside Clara, pulling her into her arms. "It's over," she said. "It's over. He's down." But it was not over. Samuel was still crying, and his cries had woken Ellie, who appeared in the doorway with her nightgown twisted and her eyes wide and dark. She looked at the man on the floor, at the blood spreading across the boards, at the shattered lamp, at her father with the rifle still raised. She did not scream. She stood very still, and then she said, in a voice that was barely a whisper, "Papa?" Daniel lowered the rifle. He set it against the wall and crossed the room to his daughter. He knelt in front of her and took her face in his hands. "It's all right, Ellie. We're safe. Everyone is safe. The bad man came into the house." "Yes, but he can't hurt us now." He stopped. Ellie looked at the man on the floor. Then she looked at Maggie, who was holding Clara, who was holding Samuel. She did not say anything else. She just leaned into her father and closed her eyes. The sheriff arrived within the hour, roused from his bed by the sound of the shot and the sight of a neighbor riding hard to fetch him. He took one look at the man on the floor, bound now with rope from the barn, and let out a long breath. "That's Vance's man," he said. "I've seen him before, hanging around town." He knelt and checked the wound. "He'll live, but he'll be talking by morning." Men like him don't stay quiet when they're staring at jail time. He took the man away, loaded onto a wagon, his hands tied, his shoulder roughly bandaged. The house fell quiet again, but the quiet was different now. It was the quiet of aftermath, of adrenaline fading, of the long, slow process of coming back to yourself after the worst has happened. Maggie sat with Clara and Samuel in the spare room, the lamp relit, the glass swept up, the blood scrubbed from the floor. Samuel had stopped crying, but he had not spoken. He sat on the bed with his knees pulled to his chest, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall that only he could see. Clara held his hand and did not let go. "He's gone deeper," Clara said. Her voice was flat. "He was just starting to come back. Now he's gone deeper." "We'll bring him back," Maggie said, "however long it takes." Clara looked at her, and there was nothing left in her eyes but exhaustion. "I don't know if I have any more fight left in me." "Then I'll fight for you until you do." In the kitchen, Daniel sat at the table with a cup of coffee he was not drinking. Ellie had gone back to bed, but he knew she was not asleep. He could hear her turning, the sheets rustling. He could feel the weight of what had happened pressing down on him. The man had been in his house. He had put his hands on Clara. He had reached for Samuel. And Daniel had fired. He had aimed to kill, and he had missed. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it left him hollow. Maggie found him there. She sat down across from him and put her hand over his. "You did what you had to do." "I know." "You saved them." "I know." He looked up at her, and there was something in his eyes that she had not seen before, not even at the worst moments. "I would have killed him," he said. "If the lamp hadn't stopped him, I would have shot him again. I would have kept shooting until he stopped moving." "You did what you had to do," she said again, "and I would have done the same." He held her gaze. Then he turned his hand over and held hers, and they sat in silence as the night wore on. The next morning, a wire arrived from St. Louis. Mrs. Halverson brought it herself, her face grim. "It's from Esther Winthrop," she said. "She says Vance has been arrested." The investigation found enough evidence to charge him with assault, fraud, and attempting to subvert a custody order. He's in jail, and he's not getting out any time soon. Maggie read the wire twice. She felt the weight of the words settle into her, slow and deep. It was over. Really over. Edward Vance was finished. The man sent to take Samuel was in custody. There was no one left to run from. She walked to the spare room and told Clara. Clara listened without expression. Then she stood up, walked to the bed where Samuel was still sitting, and knelt in front of him. "Samuel," she said, "the bad man is in jail. He can't hurt us anymore. We don't have to hide." Samuel looked at her. His eyes were empty, hollowed out by days of fear and nights of cold. But then, slowly, something flickered. A question, a hope he did not trust. "Really?" he said. It was the first word he had spoken in 4 days. "Really," Clara said. "We're safe." Samuel looked at the door, at the window, at the light coming through the curtains. Then he looked at his mother, and his face crumpled, and he cried. He cried the way a child cries when the fear finally breaks, when the body lets go of everything it has been holding. Clara held him, and Maggie stood in the doorway and watched, and she felt the tears running down her own face. That evening the town came, not in a formal delegation, but in the way small towns show up when they have finally decided where they stand. Mrs. Pete brought a casserole. The Reverend's wife brought a loaf of bread. Harold Pete came with a bag of flour and a brief nod. Mrs. Halverson brought a pie and stayed to cut it. They did not say much. They did not have to. They came, and they brought food, and they sat on the porch in the cooling evening, and they showed that they were there. Clara came out to join them, Samuel beside her. She was hesitant, her eyes darting to the road, to the horizon, looking for threats that were no longer there. But she came. She sat on the porch step with her son in her lap, and she watched the sun go down over a town that had decided to take her in. Later, after the neighbors had gone and the house was quiet, Maggie found Ellie sitting on the porch, looking up at the stars. She sat down beside her. "Are you all right?" Maggie asked. "I think so." Ellie was quiet for a moment. "The man who came last night, he wanted to take Samuel." "Yes." "Why?" Maggie hesitated. "How do you explain cruelty to a child who has known only love?" "Because there are people in the world who want to hurt others. They want to take things that don't belong to them. But there are also people who stop them. Your papa stopped him. The sheriff stopped him. And now he's in jail, and he can't hurt anyone anymore." Ellie nodded slowly. "Is Samuel going to be all right?" "I think so. It's going to take time. He's been very scared for a very long time." "Can I help him?" Maggie looked at her. Her dark eyes were serious, full of that fierce, unshakable certainty that had grabbed Maggie's hand on a train platform and refused to let go. "I think you already are," Maggie said. "Just by being here. Just by being you." Ellie considered this. Then she leaned her head against Maggie's arm and said nothing. They sat together in the dark, mother and daughter, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. And Maggie thought about the chain of events that had brought her here. The letter, the platform, the man who never came, the child who ran forward with both hands out. She thought about Clara, who had shown her kindness in a boarding house years ago, and who had come to her now, desperate and broken. She thought about Esther Winthrop, who had traveled 600 miles to take a child and had left behind a gift that had saved another. She thought about the receipt in the dust, the court order overturned, the man in the jail cell, the family sleeping in the beds around her. It was not a story she could have planned. It was not a life she could have imagined. But it was hers, fully and completely, and she would not trade it for anything. In the cave of her chest, where fear had lived for so long, something new was growing. It was small and quiet, but it was there. It was the certainty that she belonged here, in this place, with these people, and that no amount of darkness could take that away. The morning after the town had gathered on the porch, the world looked different. The light came through the window softer, the sounds of the house settling around Maggie like a familiar song. She woke early, as she always did, but this time she lay still for a moment, letting the peace wash over her. The ring on her finger caught the light, and she turned it, remembering the night Daniel had given it to her. The way his hands had trembled slightly, the way he had said, "I made it." She had not taken it off since. She rose and dressed and walked into the kitchen. The smell of coffee was already there, and Daniel was at the stove. the same position she had found him in the morning after Esther left. He turned when she entered, and he smiled, that small, real smile that she had come to treasure. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He poured her a cup, and she wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "I was thinking," he said, "about what comes next." "What does come next?" He set down his cup. "We never had a wedding, not a real one. Just the judge and Mrs. Halverson and a piece of paper." He looked at her, and there was a nervousness in his eyes that she had not seen before. "I'd like to give you that. A real wedding. In the church, with the town there. With Ellie standing with us. With Clara and Samuel in the pews." Maggie felt her throat tighten. "You want to do it again?" "I want to do it right." He reached across the counter and took her hand. "I want everyone to see that you're my wife, that you're Ellie's mother, that this is our family." She looked at him, at this quiet, steady man who had opened his door to a stranger and had never once made her feel like she was borrowing his life. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." The news spread through Clover Falls the way good news spreads, fast and warm, and carried on the voices of women who had decided that Maggie Brooks deserved something beautiful. Mrs. Halverson took charge of the arrangements with the efficiency of a general planning a campaign. The Reverend's wife offered to decorate the church with wildflowers. Mrs. Pete, who had once measured sugar with judgment in her eyes, brought a bolt of white fabric and said, "For a dress. I kept it for my daughter's wedding, but she married in the city, so you might as well have it." Maggie stood in the kitchen with the fabric in her hands, the white cloth soft and clean, and she felt the weight of the gesture. This was not just a gift. It was an apology, an acceptance, a welcome. She held it to her chest and nodded. "Thank you. I'll make it myself." The days leading up to the wedding were full and rich. Clara, emerging slowly from the shell of her fear, began to help with the preparations. She hemmed the dress, her stitches small and even, her hands steady for the first time in weeks. Samuel followed her like a shadow, but he had begun to speak again. Single words at first, then short sentences. "Can I help?" he asked one morning, and Clara looked at Maggie with tears in her eyes and nodded. Ellie took Samuel under her wing with the same fierce determination she had used on Maggie. She showed him the mockingbird, taught him how to sound out letters on the slate board, and informed him that he was now her brother, which meant he had to do what she said. Samuel looked at her with solemn eyes and said, "All right." It was the beginning of something. The wedding was set for a Saturday afternoon, late enough that the heat had begun to ease, early enough that the light would be golden. The church was small, white, with a steeple that pointed toward a sky that seemed to have been scrubbed clean just for the occasion. Flowers lined the aisle, wild daisies and bluebells gathered by Ellie and Samuel, who had spent the morning running through the fields with baskets. The pews filled with people Maggie had nursed through fever, had traded with at the general store, had smiled at on the street. The town of Clover Falls, which had once watched her stand alone on a platform, now watched her walk down the aisle on the arm of the man who had made her a home. She wore the dress she had made from Mrs. Pete's fabric, simple and clean, with a collar that buttoned at the neck and a skirt that brushed the floor. She carried no bouquet. She did not need one. Ellie walked ahead of her, scattering petals from a basket with the solemn concentration of a child who understood the importance of her role. Clara sat in the front pew with Samuel beside her, and when Maggie passed, Clara reached out and touched her hand, just for a moment, a gesture that said everything. The Reverend was a different man from the one who had come to the house with his hat in his hands. He looked at Maggie with warmth in his eyes, and he said the words that married her to Daniel with a sincerity that made the simple ceremony feel like a sacrament. Daniel took her hand, and she saw that his eyes were wet. He did not try to hide it. "I didn't know I was waiting for you," he said, his voice rough, "until you stepped off that train. And then I knew. I've been knowing ever since." She squeezed his hand. "I stepped off that train with nothing, and I found everything." The Reverend pronounced them married, and the town applauded. Ellie threw her arms around both of them, and Samuel, after a moment of hesitation, did the same. Clara stood and clapped, and her smile was the first real smile Maggie had seen on her face since she arrived. After the ceremony, there was a gathering in the churchyard. Mrs. Halverson had organized a spread of food that covered 3 tables. fried chicken, biscuits, pies, a ham that Harold Pete had brought from his smokehouse. People ate and talked and laughed, and the children ran through the grass, chasing each other and the mockingbird that had followed Ellie from the house and now perched on the fence, watching the proceedings with the air of an honored guest. Maggie stood at the edge of the gathering, holding a cup of lemonade, watching her family. Daniel was talking to the sheriff, his hand resting on Ellie's shoulder. Clara was sitting on a bench with Samuel in her lap, and a neighbor woman was leaning in, saying something that made Clara smile. The sun was low, the light golden, and everything felt like a photograph, like a moment she would hold in her chest forever. Daniel came to stand beside her. "You look like you're 1,000 miles away." "I'm exactly where I want to be." She leaned into him. "I was just thinking about the platform." "The platform?" "The day I arrived. I stood there for so long, watching everyone else get chosen. And I thought I had failed. I thought I had come all this way for nothing." She looked up at him. "But I hadn't failed. I was just waiting for the right thing to find me." He put his arm around her. "I'm glad it found you." "Me too." The evening deepened and the guests began to drift away, carrying plates and chairs and the warmth of a good day. Mrs. Halverson was the last to leave. She stood at the gate and looked back at the house, at the light in the windows, at the family gathered inside. "You did good, Maggie," she said. "You built something here." "I had help." Mrs. Halverson smiled, a rare, full smile that softened the lines of her face. "That's what a town is supposed to be." She turned and walked away, her figure disappearing into the dusk. That night, after Clara had put Samuel to bed and Ellie had finally stopped talking long enough to fall asleep, Maggie and Daniel sat on the porch. The stars were out, the air cool and clean. The ring on her hand felt like it had always been there. "I have something for you," Daniel said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He handed it to her, and she opened it. Inside was a silver locket on a thin chain. She opened it, and inside were 2 photographs. One of Ellie, smiling that slow, deep smile, and one of Daniel, taken years ago, younger, his face less worn, but already carrying the same steady eyes. "I had it made in town," he said. "I wanted you to have something to carry with you, something that says you belong with us." She looked at the locket, at the faces of her family, and she felt the tears come. She did not try to stop them. "I don't need a locket to know I belong," she said, "but I'll wear it anyway." He helped her fasten it around her neck, and the metal was cool against her skin. She touched it, felt the weight of it, and she knew that this was the moment she would remember. Not the wedding, not the ceremony, but this quiet porch, this man, this locket, this certainty. The days that followed were the days of a life being lived. Clara found work at the boarding house, helping Mrs. Halverson with the cleaning and the cooking. She moved into a small room there with Samuel, but she came to the Brooks house for supper every evening, and Samuel spent his afternoons with Ellie, learning his letters and feeding the mockingbird. The boy began to laugh, tentatively at first, then more freely. He called Ellie his sister, and she corrected him. "I'm your big sister, you have to say big." "Yes, big sister," he said, and Ellie nodded, satisfied. The fall came, bringing cooler air and the harvest. Daniel and Maggie worked the land together, side by side, and Ellie and Samuel helped where they could, carrying water, gathering eggs, learning the rhythm of a working ranch. The house was full, not just of people, but of sound, of life, of the small, precious moments that make up a family. One evening, as the leaves began to turn and the light grew softer, Maggie found herself standing at the fence where the mockingbird still came. Ellie was beside her, Samuel on the other side. The bird preened on the top rail, tilting its head at them. "I think he's getting old," Ellie said. "He doesn't sing as much as he used to." "Maybe he's just tired," Maggie said. "He's been singing for a long time." "Will he stop?" "Eventually, but not yet." They stood in silence, the 3 of them, watching the bird. And Maggie thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the woman who had stepped off the train, the one who had stood alone on the platform with a crumpled letter and a heart full of hope she was afraid to name. She thought about the child who had run across the boards, the hands that had grabbed hers and refused to let go. She thought about the man who had opened his door, the woman who had come with her son, the town that had learned to see her. She thought about the locket against her chest, the ring on her finger, the life she had built, not out of grand gestures, but out of small, steady choices, made day after day, until they added up to something unshakable. The mockingbird fluffed its feathers and let out a single note, clear and sweet, before falling silent. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange and rose. Ellie leaned against her, and Samuel leaned against Ellie, and they stood like that, a chain of people holding each other up, as the light faded and the stars began to appear. Maggie touched the locket. She looked at the horizon, where the prairie stretched out into the gathering dark, endless and full of possibility. She thought about the word Ellie had learned to spell: belonging. It meant being where you were supposed to be. It meant being held and holding others. It meant that no matter what came, you would not face it alone. The frontier was a harsh place. It took everything you had and asked for more. But it also gave in ways that surprised you. It gave you people who became your strength, moments that became your memory, a place that became your home. Maggie had come to Texas with nothing. She had built a family out of scraps and stubbornness and a child's unshakable faith. She had learned that family was not about blood. It was about showing up, day after day, and choosing each other. It was about the small things: the coffee made in the morning, the hand held in the dark, the word written on a slate board, the biscuit shared at a worn table. She looked at Daniel, who had come to stand in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the warm light of the kitchen. He raised a hand, and she raised hers in return. No words needed. The gesture said everything. This is Clint Dawson, and you've been listening to Frontier Heart Audio. Until next time, keep your heart open and your trails safe.